Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna go ahead and get started. It looks like there's some people still jumping on, but hopefully by the time we're done with our introductions, most of the people will be on. My name is Patty Arena, and I am the Assistant Director of Education and Outreach here at Achieve a Family Trust. And I want to thank you for joining us today for this important presentation. We have close to 300 people registered for this webinar, so clearly these topics are very important to so many people. This webinar will be recorded and put on our website by early next week. So I can send out a reminder when it's up there, but if you visit our website at www.achieveafamilytrust.org, you'll find it there. And I did put our website in the chat box, and I'll put it in again. So again, this webinar will be recorded. I'll send out the slides to everyone in attendance later today, so you can watch out for those. And, those were just a couple housekeeping items I wanted to tell you about. So thank you again for attending. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Catherine Ream. Catherine is a regional trust liaison with Achieve a Family Trust up in the Erie area. And she's also the executive director of the ARC Erie County, who we are doing this program in collaboration with. So we're always happy to work with them. And we have people from all across the state on today's webinar. So I'll let Catherine introduce herself and tell you a little bit about how we're going to move forward with the webinar. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Patty, thank you so much for that information. As Patty said, my name is Catherine Ream, and I am the Executive Director of the ARC of Erie County. And as Patty said, thank you all so much for joining us today. We did offer this presentation statewide because all of the information and the presenters cover the entire state of Pennsylvania. And so that's why we opened it up to everyone across the state. We have three presenters today with just a wealth of information. They have been working in the disability community for many, many years and have really important and timely information to share with us. We are going to take questions after each presenter finishes their presentation. However, if you have a larger question or a more involved question, we will connect you to that presenter offline so that you will be able to get the time and attention you need for your question. But if you just have a general question, please type that in the chat box. We will be keeping track of that, and we'll be reading those questions after each presenter is done doing their presentation. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Let me introduce our first presenter. Frank Magny is a public affairs specialist for the Social Security Administration. And we have been in the planning stages for this presentation for some time. And I really just want to take a minute to thank all of the presenters for all of the information that they're going to share with us today. It's really important information that families and providers need. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Frank, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And let me relay the same gratitude for taking the time to understand these programs. I understand that a lot of people in this room work with the target audience that we all have to promote and help each day. And in so doing, you taking the extra time to understand this stuff is really going to help get the message out much better. Much appreciation to the ARC of Erie County and Achieve a Family Trust. They did the brunt of the marketing for this presentation, so I really appreciate it. I'm always looking to get out there, and I'm a relatively new public affairs specialist that covers Central Pennsylvania, but the Social Security Administration has a bit of a challenge right now. I'm very, very happy to talk about work incentives today because it affects our disability population. But, the pandemic was a rough time from the standpoint that we saw some decreased participation in some of our disability programs. So, from that standpoint, number one, if you would like me to speak about any type of topic, disability related with any organizations, there are parts of the state that I'm trying to target more so than others. Please, get my contact information, reach out to me. I'm talking work incentives today, but I can talk, the different disability programs, which we're going to come up on here in just a moment. But I'm really looking, especially in the Reading, York, and Harrisburg areas to, basically reach out and provide this information. Catherine will tell you, other ARC chapters will tell you, we can do presentations with your staffs, and then we can also do presentations with your families, the individuals that you help every day. I just did one of those last night with the ARC of Lancaster and Lebanon counties, and this was a group of parents that had individuals with lifelong disabilities. I'm very tailorable. So I'll, if we connect, we would make a presentation that would fit any of your needs. So I would hope so that some individuals reach out to me as a result. So with that being said, let's get into it. Ton of information here as it relates to what we consider work incentives. Now, like a lot of things with Social Security, we kind of will take a topic and we'll give it a kind of a general term, and sometimes that term doesn't necessarily come across as exactly, it doesn't give the best descriptor, and I'll talk about a couple of those terms throughout here. But when we talk about work incentives, these are designed to protect cash and medical benefits while an individual works. If your benefits end because of work and you have to stop working later, work incentives can make it easier to begin receiving benefits again. So you'll find much of the information that I talk about during today's presentations are individuals that are receiving Social Security disability and supplemental security income. But it's not just, while they have benefits. And of course, there's plenty of work incentives as they relate to that. But it's the entire process in which they test their ability to return to work. Much of what these work incentives are trying to promote amongst individuals that are receiving Social Security benefits is the trial periods, and I'll talk about those specific terms when I come up to them. But basically, allowing an individual to basically test their ability to return to work, and in so doing, information is power. I feel like there is a somewhat resignation of individuals that are receiving Social Security benefits that they should not work at all because they would foresee some type of interruption to their benefits. However, we know, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll see there's so much built into our laws, so much built into our policy that allow an individual to not only work while they're receiving benefits, but potentially attest their ability to go back to work and believe it or not, still receive benefits for a period of time. So with all that being said, SSI and SSDI are very different in the regards of how the programs are limited and how a person qualifies. The way work is counted, how it's reported, when it impacts a person's eligibility, and as well as what incentives exist. They all work in a different way, different ages, different programs. From that standpoint, the end objective of today's presentation is not to say, okay, now I'm a subject matter expert as it relates to these programs. The end objective here is to know kind of what exists out there if you have an individual in front of you, and how you can kind of refer them, because that is one of the more impressive parts of this presentation. And as this subject matter is, there's an entire ecosystem out there, and it'll start with the presenter after me. There's also offices of vocational rehabilitation, different state offices, and they all exist so that we promote these types of situations for individuals to return to work or work while they're receiving benefits or get back on the benefits after maybe they can't work anymore. So let's get into it here. As far as this presentation is concerned, kind of have a general layout here. I'll briefly talk about disability programs. If you are more interested in disability programs, as I address right here, I can do much more time here talking about Social Security disability, supplemental security income, and basically what we call post-eligibility as it relates applying, appeals, and so on and so forth. But the definition of disability comes into play not only when a person's applying for benefits, but it also comes into play when an individual is getting those benefits. And then, the big terminology, and Catherine, before we started the presentation, said, don't use jargon. So the list of jargon that I'm going to use today, we'll start with this term here at the bottom, which is known as substantial gainful activity. And you'll hear that quite frequently as I go through the presentation. So to allow for more time specific, as you can see here, in the Social Security Administration, we call the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, we call that Title II. That's a kind of a jargon. The Supplemental Security Income Program, in general, individuals receive these benefits on the first of the month. Individuals that receive SSDI get benefits on the third, second, third, or fourth Wednesday of the month. And these programs The SSDI program is that program that we're all paying into by paying FICA taxes. This is the program. This is an extension of the program that pays retirement benefits and has so many other types of benefits for family members with deceased workers or individuals that are disabled. The Title 16 program, the SSI, Supplemental Security Income Program, is a needs-based federal welfare program. Comes out of general tax revenue, and it's basically there for individuals that qualify financially basically do not have access to that Social Security benefits because maybe they had not worked long enough or paid enough into the Social Security system. The Social Security disability program is a longer term benefit. The SSI benefit can be as much as month to month, depending on income and resources of the individuals. Now, individuals can receive supplemental security income for an extended period of time, but I always like to give the distinction to supplemental security income as a month-to-month program because it's there for an individual when they need it. If they have enough income and resources at a different time, they don't need it. But as we'll talk about during this presentation, they might still have an active record in which they can turn the benefits back on, within a month to, 30 to 60 days. And in some cases, up to 5 to 6 months, but we'll get to that here in just a moment. As far as the definition of disability, so what takes place a lot of times when a person's denied for disability, they get very frustrated in that the Social Security Administration is saying that they are not disabled. Well, a lot of times what happens as a result of a denial, and this happens a lot while a person is working, is that, our definition of disability, Social Security's definition of disability. Number one, it's a long-term definition. So these are disabilities that are expected to last 12 or more months. Result in passing, but it also ties to an individual's amount of work recent to the filing, and it varies upon age. So from that standpoint, if a person obviously has a disability but is working above that terminology, substantial gainful activity, it's not considered a disability from Social Security standpoint. So that does kind of flummox some individuals as it relates to this. That is one of the bitter tastes that an individual might have as to being denied for these types of benefits. So the big one, and we can, if you're going to be in this kind of ecosystem, substantial gainful activity is it's used during the initial claim and defining whether a person is working too much. Very common scenario takes place when individuals apply for benefits and then continue to work above this amount, immediately are denied, because that is tied to our definition of disability. But this a monthly amount, it varies from year to year, and it's typically tied to the cost of living increases as it relates to, the big one we just had, the 8.7%, the earnings limit that a retiree might have. So throughout my, 13 years of working for the agency, I've seen this monthly amount go up from $1,000 a month now to $1,470 per month. So obviously not full-time wages, but really kind of a point in which when it comes to Social Security benefits, this amount is always something to kind of keep an eye on. And if you are looking at wages for an individual, or maybe you are screening them and you're trying to determine eligibility, so on and so forth, this amount is a gross amount. So this is before any taxes or anything else. So you could basically sit a person down. You can say, all right, how many hours a week did you work? How much do you make per hour? You come to that sum. That's what it relates to as far as the $1,470 for 2023. Gainful work is work performed for pay or profit. Work of the nature generally performed is pay or profit, or the work intended for profit. It's kind of a self-employment type situation as it relates. SGA work is not vacation or sick payments. Any earnings not directly related to your work activity. And I'm going to get a little more in depth with those types of topics as we come up here. So, all right. Here's some other terminologies. We do commonly referred to in this realm of work incentives, subsidies and special conditions, unsuccessful work attempts, the income related, we call those IRWs. But I'm going to touch on a lot of these programs as we go through the rest of this presentation. As far as subsidies and special conditions are concerned, we consider the existence of subsidies and special conditions when we make a substantial gainful activity decision. We use only earnings that represent the real value of work that is performed. So from that standpoint, a subsidy or special condition may exist if you receive more supervision than other workers during the same or similar time. If you have fewer or simpler tasks to complete, other than the workers doing the same job for the same pay, if you're given additional longer paid breaks or other workers doing the same job and the same pay, if you have a coach or mentor who helps you perform some of your work. And when I talk about subsidies and special conditions, I'm talking specifically about the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. This really does get complicated. Fortunately, there are field offices that are local to basically every one of you that have specialists within the offices that basically process these types of claims. But it's always important to note, as I say, it's quite simply, you take the hourly wages and you add them up to a specific amount. It's always important to note in these types of situations that there are other factors that can, basically determine an individual to be working below substantial gainful activity, because once again, our program basically does account for the fact that people are going to work while they apply. People are going to potentially work because, once again, we go back to that definition of disability, and its ability of affecting how much a person can work and earn. As I kind of had alluded to on a previous occasion, these programs are designed so that in some cases a person can return to work, find that the disability is still affecting them, and then stop working again. Hopefully these programs allow for the disability benefits to continue to flow. This also includes Medicare eligibility, which I'll talk more about as we go through the rest. But when we make a SGA decision to determine if a disability continues or ceases because of work, we do not count your earnings during what we call an unsuccessful work attempt. The unsuccessful work attempt can happen during what we call an extended period of eligibility. And I'm going to talk about that period here in just a moment. And then the unsuccessful work attempt cannot take place during the trial work period, but we'll get there in just a moment. And for SSI claims, we only consider an unsuccessful work attempt during the time in which you filed the initial claim. It does not come into play as we reduce benefits, so on and so forth. There are other policies and programs in play, but you won't find this terminology used much for individuals receiving supplemental security income on a longer term basis. Once again, as a Social Security disability insurance type of situation, impairment related work expenses, we deduct these once again from that gross amount to determine whether or not a person is working substantially. But these are items or services that enable you to work. You need the items or services because of a physical or mental impairment. You pay for the items or services and are not reimbursed by another source such as Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance carrier. And the cost is reasonable, and it represents the standard charge of the item or service in your community. If you receive SSI benefits, we exclude income-related work expenses from your earned income when we figure your monthly payment amount. If you meet the requirements above and you paid the expense in the month in which you receive the income. So IRWs, income-related work expenses, are a Social Security disability thing and can be a supplemental security income type of situation. Here are some of the examples of what we consider income-related work expenses. Now, commonly when we're doing these continuing disability reviews or we're doing these initial claims, Some people will see that just the transportation costs at large are what can be counted as an ROE. That's not the case. Here on the top, we see that the cost of the vehicle, whether modified or not, the cost of the modifications of your vehicle that are not directly related to the impairment or critical to the operation of the vehicle, and then the travel expenses related to obtaining medical items or services. So it's transportation costs aren't just gas money, aren't just car payments. As we define here, these are related to the extra transportation costs that the disability person can accrue by working, basically. So as you can see with these, the theme with these income related work expenses is that it's all due to the process of working. It's not, kind of cursory living expenses. And in so doing, that is a little bit of a challenge when we're trying to inform members of the public as it relates to these. You'll commonly see this form, the SSA form 821, or sometimes 820 for self-employment. You would see these forms. It's important to note that every person that receives disability benefits, whether it be Social Security disability or SSI, undergoes what we call a continuing disability review. This can take place for medical purposes and can take place for work purposes. So one of the, if a person does not report the work to us on an ongoing basis, the Social Security Administration basically does get IRS tax data to the effect that, okay, we see that this person's working, but that data for us is very, very flawed. Basically, in some cases, it's only in a year increment. And in other cases, sometimes we can get it down to a quarterly increment. But the purpose of this form is to basically identify when the wages were accrued. One of the more complicated parts of this form is basically the table in which the people get down to, and we're asking month, how much was earned, in gross, month, how much was earned in gross. If you read the fine print on the forms, basically the best way for the Social Security Administration to evaluate work after the fact, so a person's already receiving benefits, is to get the pay stubs. And because on these forms, you're able to check, I included the pay stubs, you would include this along with this 821 or 820. And then the technicians within the office can not only make the determinations of the month, and you'll see why that's important here in just a moment, take this IRS tax data and distill it down from a year or quarterly so that we know, what months that these were accrued. But this is a form that also can kind of identify any income related work expenses. So many people do ask for assistance with these types of forms. You might see these, as you work with the members of the disability public. But that's my best practice as it relates to this form. So, this is a situation that does take place. It's a little bit on the complicated side, but for individuals who are getting benefits and they would like to return to work, there are programs in place that we call the plans for achieving self-support. They can be catered and designed for an individual. And this is a part of that ecosystem that I was talking about beyond the Social Security offices, and where state offices can kind of come into play and are very, very active in involvement with an individual as it relates to a plan for achieving a self-support. This type of programs typically not, other than from an informational standpoint or a document exchange type standpoint, the plans for achieving self-support are not primarily something that's dealt with in the field office. There's other parts of the agency that basically approves and looks at these. But so the pass will have a specific work goal, a time period, the income you receive other than the SSI payment. And it's important to note, this is very related to supplemental security income. So as I switch to this, as I said, I would go back and forth to the different programs. This program is specific for individuals that are receiving SSI. And as you can see on this slide, we basically have the expenses that the past program can help pay for. This is a way in which a person can work and still receive SSI benefits, and part of that income can be exempted so that an individual is still receiving their full amount of SSI benefits, but more money can be accrued or conserved so that a person can go to, a job training or an internship or all kinds of different types of programs identified by the past program, and in order for them to gain skills, still receive their benefits, and then get to the point where maybe they can get a better job so that the benefits are no longer needed. Some brief kind of situations that are kind of broken down in this slide here. I'm not going to get into this too closely, just for purposes of time as it relates to these types of presentations. But as you can kind of get an appreciation of what I just said, this program allows an individual to still receive their benefits, their SSI, supplemental security income benefits, and are able to basically are exempted from certain income and resource requirements as it relates to this program. So it can be very, very beneficial and allow a person a period of time in which they still get benefits and then can prepare themselves as they go off and try to obtain better employment. Here's another example of a past situation. This does involve supplemental, Social Security disability insurance benefits. Right, and then you can see tuition, books, and other types of expenses that a person might accrue while they are returning or are getting trained for different employment. So the Ticket to Work program is a program that's available in all 50 states and is available to both individuals that are receiving Social Security disability benefits or supplemental security income and are eligible to retain services from state vocational rehabilitation agencies. These services, you don't necessarily need a ticket in Pennsylvania in order to utilize these services. Vocational rehabilitation services are available if you just approach the state directly, but this program has a way of kind of, directing individuals into that, into the parts of those programs. And then there's also approved providers that are known as employment networks, are private organizations or government agencies that have agreed to work with Social Security to provide employment services to beneficiaries with disabilities. You can participate in this program by contacting the Ticket to Work helpline, and basically any individual that's receiving benefits would have a ticket available to them so that they can be, helped with vocational services, and in some cases directed towards potential job opportunities, sometimes designed specifically for individuals with disabilities. Some information as it relates to Ticket to Work. Obviously, these slides will be distributed to everybody that attended the call after the fact. So, as we bounce around here from SSI and Social Security disability insurance, we're back to Social Security disability insurance here, and a term that we use as expedited reinstatement. EXRs are basically after the fact, after a person had been approved for disability benefits, had gotten disability benefits, had returned to work at a substantial level, and now maybe their disability is affecting them again. This allows a person that had the benefits on a previous occasion to, when an individual goes below working substantial gainful activity, they're able to make a request right away that they receive benefits for a 5-month period, and during that period will obtain the medical decision for that individual. And obviously, this is a little different than if a person's applying for benefits for the first time. During that initial claims processing time, a person's not receiving benefits most of the time. And we have to wait for that decision. This is a situation in which a person can approach us right away within 30 to 60 days, start their benefits back up because they might not be working as much anymore. And this is initiated. This is scheduled. This cannot be done online. This is typically scheduled with the local field office of the individual in order in those types of cases where they had returned to work and now they'd like to restart their Social Security disability insurance benefits. All right. Section 301, payment continuation. This is a very, very interesting program. I've recently talked to some, vocational rehab, some Office of Vocational Rehabilitation recently about how this is right now being underused in certain cases. But if we find that you're no longer disabled, you might still be able to receive monthly benefits. And in addition to this, Section 301 can sometimes apply to medical assistant benefits, and in some cases, Section 301, it will involve, it's one of these more complicated, probably larger level programs that the field office and the offices that I've already spoke about would assist an individual with, but for this program, most of the time you're going to see individuals that are between the ages of 18 and 21. Okay. So as far as Social Security disability insurance, so once again, these are individuals that receive a benefit amount that was based on the work previous to the disability, and sometimes work during the disability. So an individual that gets supplemental Social Security disability insurance benefits one person might be receiving $1,000 a month, another person might be receiving $2,500 per month. That's kind of that'll be a good red flag for you, as it were, or just basically identifier for you if you're trying to identify that's getting these types of benefits. And they generally, as I talked about before, get their benefits on the 3rd of the month, the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Wednesday of the month. And also important to note, I should have probably said this when we were talking about the two benefits at the same time, but you might run into some people that actually get both benefits because the income and resource rules of the SSI program will, allow the Social Security disability insurance benefits to be paid first, and then the SSI will fill in the blanks basically above and beyond that if they receive a limited amount. The maximum amount for SSI this year in 2023 is $914 per month. Individuals who are basically living by themselves and are paying the full share of expenses in the households in which they live would receive this amount. But as you can see, if you start seeing monthly benefit amounts, more into the $1,000 to $1,000 range, $1,000 to $2,000 range, this is the program that we're talking about: Social Security disability insurance. And here are the common terms that are used as far as this is concerned. Now, in 2023, the average amount that an individual receives from SSDI is about $1,300 per month. So while many people appreciate this, it's not a ton of money for an individual to live off of. Now, in certain cases, as this program exists, if a person is disabled and they have children of certain ages, they might get additional benefits. That's not the case with SSI. Supplemental security income. So, from that standpoint, they might be receiving more in benefits. But the thing about work incentives that are very important to me is that we do have this population that doesn't get in relationship to a person that might be working full time, they might not be getting a lot of money to work off of. So having the ability of working part time and and even working to the limits of this program, these trial work periods and extended work eligibility really allows them kind of a key lifeline in which, if they are basically actively working under substantial gainful activity. Now it gets more complicated than that, but if all their wages are below that $1,470 for this year, they basically can continue to receive the full amount of their benefits. So it does get more complicated than that. However, we need to, as advocates, encourage individuals to return to work, not necessarily so that the benefits stop at a different time, but return to work so that they potentially get more money within their household to support their families, so on and so forth, and get both benefits at the same time. So a trial work period is a non-consecutive 9-month period. So for an individual that is returning to work, it's only the months in which they, for 2023, more than $1,050 per month. So they can go back to work in January, make $1,200, gross per month. That'll count as one trial work month. They can go back in February, maybe only make $800. That is not. So out of those 2 months, they've only used one of those trial work periods. So I can't call it a 9-month period. It's a 9-month non-consecutive period. The benefit of the trial work period. So basically, quite simply, when I get those, because I've worked in the field office for many years before taking this position, and would basically get that kind of simple question to the individual that's receiving benefits: how much can I work and still get benefits? Well, the simple answer to this is $1,050 a month in 2023, because if they do that, they will always remain in the trial work period. And the advantage of the trial work period is that the benefits basically continue, and a person can kind of, infinitely still receive benefits if they're not initiating these trial work months. But let's look at the trial work period from the other perspective, not just the individual that maybe wants to work and supplement their income, but the person that is returning to work full time. The trial work period is amazing when you really think about it, because it's not just the $1,050. A person during this 9-month non-consecutive period can basically work and earn as much money as they like and still receive the Social Security benefits. So they can return to work full time. And nowadays, let's kind of talk about real world numbers here. Most people are making, I understand minimum wage is lower, but you're starting to see average wages in the neighborhood of $12 to $15 per hour. As a result of that, 40 hours a week, you're going to levels much, much higher than substantial gainful activity. So full-time work right now is much higher than $1,050 or much higher than the $1,470. And in so doing, this 9-month period is that period in which a person can say, you know what, let me take this full-time job and let me see if I can do that. And if they're unsuccessful in this isn't an unsuccessful work attempt per se, the benefits just continue. They might just come away from it by working 3 months above that $1,050, and in so doing, still retain their benefits, not only their monthly benefits, but their Medicare benefits, and all kind of the cursory parts of that come about. So a person should feel very, very confident very early in the process, if they have never worked before, as to returning to work, or having an employer come to them with a job opportunity to try it out, because this part of the process exists, that being the trial work period. So I should have probably jumped up to this slide as I was kind of explaining it a little bit more, but I basically talked about a lot of the aspects of this slide just here in the last few moments. And then, from this standpoint, I basically conveyed a lot of the topics already as it relates to this slide. I'm sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. But from that standpoint, simply $1,050 a month less, and then they can receive benefits indefinitely. You always have to kind of keep an eye on that amount, because it varies from year to year. It never decreases; it only increases. From that standpoint, an individual, even during this period, people can feel a little bit confident. Oh my gosh, I won above. A coworker of mine broke their legs or asking me to work extra, but I have these trial work months in my back pocket. Okay, I know I can go and work and earn $1,700 per month. It's not going to affect my benefits. And then, as you can see, this is definitely an incentive. This is definitely something so that the person has enough leeway to kind of navigate returning to work. Now, after those 9 consecutive non-consecutive months end, a person enters a situation known as the extended period of eligibility. This is a 36-month period, and it works a little bit differently. So the month after the trial work period's over, the 36 months start. This period and identifying when this period begins for you will take some corresponding with the office, having to continuing disability reviews, so on and so forth. But during this time frame, a person still has the ability of working, and the months in which they're working less than substantial gainful activity, $1,470 per month, they are eligible for benefits. Any month they're working above, they're not. Now, In the case of these, the extended period of eligibility, the Social Security Administration might potentially turn benefits off. And many times this is done at the bequest of the individual so that they do not accrue overpayments. But even if we're going into one of those situations where we're going after the fact, maybe we're going over a 6-month period of time, well, it's going to be much longer than that because the trial work period would have been involved, or over years of those types of situations. This is why certain overpayments might accrue to a certain amount, why other overpayments might accrue to a certain amount, because we need to evaluate wages. Most of the time we get after the fact, and in so doing, we would those wages are month to month. They're, during this extended period of eligibility, they're considered month to month. Okay, and I gave you a little bit of a primer as to how this interacts with the trial work period, and we're getting a little technical here, as for purposes of informational. These will be in the slides so that a person can kind of get the better understanding of these examples, but we're not making experts today. We're just kind of helping them to help other individuals navigate the process. So Medicare is a huge deal for any person that had been receiving benefits for 25 months or more. Instead of Medicaid, they're receiving Medicare, which is the federal program that many people 65 years or up use. Now, there's still medical assistance that is attached to Medicare coverage, but a lot of what I'm talking about as far as keeping eligibility alive for an individual or active's better. But for keeping Social Security active, it also comes into play with Medicare coverage. All right. So, Medicare for persons with disabilities who work. Can you buy Medicare coverage? In certain cases, a person might return to work, the benefit stops. There are programs in place so that a person can buy premium-free Medicare coverage or buy premium Medicare coverage still from the federal government during the time period after the extended period of eligibility or medical cessation. Many people will find this as an advantage because Medicare coverage is much more affordable than buying coverage. I do know that there's PA Penny. I'm a big advocate for healthcare.gov coverage, but for an individual that's already on Medicare coverage due to disability, it is an advantage that they're able to, even after the benefits stop, still able to purchase Medicare coverage. This is, during a time frame. Right now, it's $164.90 during 2023, and this is a part of that medical cessation. For a person that is really staying in constant contact with their field office and they're submitting pay stubs and they're having their cases considered, this is the type of information that's going over with them after a couple years in some cases. So that trial work period is not always 9 months. That extended period of eligibility is three years. However, you do get an appreciation for the fact that this is mainly for individuals that have been working over a longer period of time. Nothing replaces a good relationship with the field office. And most of the time, these are rights and information that's given to them as they kind of navigate this. As far as supplemental security income is concerned, so we're shifting back to that program that pays everybody on the first of the month. You can see a couple of the different programs in place for these individuals. There's still some money that is deducted. There's a general exclusion of income as it relates to SSI. So the first $25 of the month is in the cases of earned income, a person working, then the first $65 of the month being exempted. We consider that a work incentive. For some individuals, they can work one day of the month and still receive their whole SSI benefit and still get that income of 85 or a few $100s, even after the $85 of income, earned income, is exempted. We do not dollar for dollar deduct from an individual's supplemental security income benefits. As you can see, individuals getting SSI and are under the age of 22 have a much higher earnings limit. And this is known as the student earned income exclusion. This is a key time for most individuals, young adults, from that 18 to 22. This is the nexus for a lot of different topics as it relates to disability, as it relates to Social Security. But basically during this time frame, a person might have even higher income limits, even more ability to return to work, and in so doing, test their ability to work, and in so doing, still receive benefits at a higher level than they would have even gotten with the other work incentives as it relates to SSI. All right, and the property essential to self-support. This is part of the SSI program when it relates to counting of income. But as you can see, that's kind of like that terminology. Work incentives and SGA. Resources is that terminology Social Security uses, supplemental security income uses for money that the person has access to. So there are certain parts of there's certain things that an individual can own that are exempted as it relates to property essential to self-support. And then the special payments for people who work, and that's the 1619A. These SSI cash payments, even when earned income or so. All right, an individual that would qualify for this must have been eligible for SSI for at least 1 month, are still disabled, meet all other eligibility rules, and then under 1690, they can receive gross income from wages and SSI payment calculated based off of wages and Medicaid. In some cases with 1619A, an individual can actually still get medical assistance benefits through Social Security, and in so doing, still retain their medical assistance benefits and might not necessarily get a monthly amount from SSI, but still have an active SSI record in order to continue to obtain specific types of benefits. All right. And then under 16, a beneficiary can retain their Medicaid. I kind of touched upon this. This is something that's utilized. It was utilized to a greater deal previous to the pandemic. The emergency declaration of the pandemic kind of made it so that individuals weren't being, the medical assistance for individuals were not being turned off at a higher rate or stopped. These types of provisions, were a bit, they were not used as much because people might have gotten medical assistance without having SSI eligibility. This program is much more important when you are kind of in an environment in which medical assistance is still tied to income and resources. This is once again a work incentive so that a person that maybe returns to work and was getting SSI can continue to get Medicaid coverage. All right, and as always, I'm kind of up against it here. But as we talked about, I had touched upon some of these themes. I had not touched upon this theme as much because I was talking a lot about Social Security disability insurance, but with SSI, because it was that month-to-month program that I was talking about, there are certain time limits in which SSI can stop because a person has the income and resources, but we can reinstate SSI benefits maybe 3-4 months after the fact because the benefits sometimes stay active. With that, a person once again should not be de-incentivized to work, even have the benefits stop, because in certain cases we can restart the benefits almost immediately depending on the time limit. Always important to note, as I had spoke about, and as you probably have seen on previous slides, there are different income levels for individuals with blindness. And the cases of individuals with blindness, they can basically work and they have a higher substantial gainful activity amount. They have higher work limits as it relates to both programs. If you are dealing with an individual that is blind or has limited vision, there's a whole different type of tables that we use as far as they're concerned. And in their cases, they can earn much more money and still receive benefits. As far as reporting is concerned, what I always do recommend is getting in contact with the field office. For a person that has started working for the first time, I hope you get the appreciation that due to the trial work period, they would have a couple months to kind of onboard to a job. In many cases, people do have that time period. There is a lag time, even for SSI and Social Security, in which a person can go get the job, identify how much they're going to be scheduled, how much, because what takes place after a person might just get that notification, yes, you have the job. It's great that an individual would contact the office at that point because we'd give them critical information, but they can be encouraged to go get the job, start the job because of all these lag periods. Find out how much they're making per hour, find out how much they're going to be scheduled. In some cases, a person in orientation is going to be different than a person that's working full-time, part-time. And then one of the most beneficial thing to approach the Social Security with is that first pay stub, because once again, you also have those exempted expenses, income related work expenses, and other exempted expenses as it relates to SSI that an individual at a field office can identify by looking at a pay stub or follow up with an employer. But gaining those types of pay stubs and then contacting the office is really, really good exercise. We can project earnings. In the case of SSI, we can project earnings so that maybe the benefits are decreased in anticipation of future earnings. The same thing can kind of take place with Social Security disability insurance. So contacting the field office when you get that good idea of how much you're working, earning, will be scheduled, will come in, because then that person that is helping you navigate the process can kind of, kind of game plan out what will take place if you started working this job, so on and so forth, and give them the necessary, okay, sir, you're only making $800 per month. You can work this job. And as long as you make that gross amount, you can continue to receive your benefits. Okay, individual, you're receiving supplemental security income. If you're making $500 per month, this is how much. So when we know those numbers, it is very beneficial. So if you are working with a person that is returning to work, try to let them on board a little bit, get that first pay stub, and then we have lots of great information that we can use and inform the individual with. There are all kinds of great ways after the fact that an individual can report their wages to the Social Security Administration, and there's all kinds of different kinds. But the common theme that you'll come back to, and part of the problem with society nowadays at large, is that pay stubs aren't as prevalent, or they're electronic. So, a person that is, talking about returning to work, this is one of these themes or topics that you can really emphasize to an individual because, as they're onboarding to this employer, they can emphasize how important it is maybe that they keep their work limited so they're not scheduled for more hours. But in addition, making sure that they get pay stubs. Not many people have printers to print off pay stubs, so on and so forth. So if an employer can ever provide them to them, then that's very beneficial. You might be able to help that person because they might have the PDFs on their phones to maybe print those off, so on and so forth. But there are, with the pay stubs, that they then have the power to kind of approach the Social Security Administration and get the best guidance for the type of program that they're receiving from and where they are as far as working and receiving benefits. The Red Book is synonymous in this industry, or kind of this work incentives. It goes over all this information. It's released every year with new amounts. And then Catherine asked me to talk about one topic. This is a little bit outside of work incentives, but a topic that's becoming more and more prevalent, and something that I'm a bit passionate about, as far as where we are as it relates to the pandemic, where we are at, the Social Security Administration, as far as the receipts that we've been getting, the amount of people that are beginning approved for benefits, and you as advocates and stakeholders that might be working with these individuals. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the appeal process. So let's peel back the onion a little bit here and say that, work incentives in general were for that person that have already gone through the process to become approved. This is for the individuals that have not yet gotten benefits. And, telling them these work incentives on top of getting the benefits is probably motivating them even more to possibly apply. But it's important to note if you are encouraging an individual or you're referring an individual into applying for benefits, the process is it's not necessarily complicated. The process itself can be demoralizing. That 62% of initial claims that are filed for Social Security are denied the first time through. So you can look at that either way. Because the common misnomer in society nowadays is that 100% of initial claims are denied by the Social Security Administration. We know that's not the case. So that 38% represents basically defined disabilities that the Disability Determination Service, and each state has their own Disability Determination Service that can use a rubric and kind of like, formatic, from a formula standpoint, identify a disability right through the bat, right away. The person's generally approved within 4 to 6 months. When we're talking about the initial claims process, we always have retroactivity that exists. Certain levels of retroactivity, but, for example, if an individual, it does take 4 to 6 months for an individual to be approved. From that standpoint, they can be paid back, during that time period, whether it be Social Security disability or whether it be SSI. And one thing I did want to address, and if you have been working amongst the disability population for an extended period of time, it's important to note that Pennsylvania, up until 2018, was what was known as a prototype state. I'm sorry, I think it was 2019. I looked this up after I had been talking about this. A prototype state meant that a person went directly from an initial claim to level 2 on this slide, which was the hearing by an administrative law judge. So our state went back to the processes of many other states, in which there's also a appeal level that is between that initial claim and the administrative law judge. So this reconsideration is also done by the Disability Determination Service, the state contracted office that makes disability determinations for the state of Pennsylvania. And in so doing, it's another technician that will go over the methodology of the other technicians. From a demoralizing standpoint, a very high majority of reconsiderations are upheld. The reason I'm basically talking to everybody today is identifying that for individuals that might have like multiple disabilities or kind of due to many different types of disabilities, a total inability to work, so on and so forth, they really should be encouraged to follow their claim the whole way to the hearing by an administrative law judge. The challenge in that is that the person must stay engaged. They must file the appeals. So a person has a 60-day period after a denial to file for a reconsideration. If they're denied from reconsideration, they have another 60 days in which they can apply for an appeal with an administrative law judge. And it's important to note, one of the most important data that the Disability Determination Service or the information or the administrative law judge is recent medical information. So each time that an appeal is filed, a person's best served to be providing the most recent medical information. If a person's starting from basically square one, I'm disabled, I can't work, and it started this process, information, once it gets to the administrative law judge level, the new information can be used. So even though this is a longer period of time, as I kind of talked about, an initial claim could take 4 to 6 months. If we can encourage individuals to apply for an appeal right away and not wait the full 60 days or beyond, they can go right to reconsideration. That takes about the same amount of time as an initial claim. We might be up to 10 months to a year at this point. If we can lop off that time period, they file for the appeal right away. So, I've already identified, 4 months here in which if we're helping the people navigate this appeal process, we can lop this 4 months off in waiting time, in that they come right back. They come right in. I want to appeal. They come right back in. I want to appeal. And even if you do have situations in which individuals might be after that 60-day period, they should be potentially encouraged to continue the appeal that they have and in so doing, still retain that retroactivity, and in certain cases, getting that one step level to that administrative law judge in order to have the approach of the administrative law judge, the hearing where they consider evidence a little bit differently other than the disability determination service, where they might have more access to more recent medical evidence because they might have been advised or might have, gotten more recent medical evidence that talked about their disability. If they have this active claim and it's been a couple months and they say, I got denied, and they start from scratch, they might be, not utilizing all the time period, and they might, you'll see this cycle with a lot of individuals where they'll apply on the initial level, they're denied, they're demoralized, they wait a little bit more time, they become more desperate, they apply again, another initial claim. This is this encouragement for a person to kind of stick with this process, even though I will fully admit it does take a long amount of time. It's very, very difficult for an individual to only be able to make limited income below that substantial amount, especially if they're supporting a family. That's a big frustration with these types of benefits, but it is the reality of the situation. And I think you will find and run into individuals that, had been denied from the initial level, but need to be encouraged to do this, because any person that had won their case through the administrative law judge or been approved for benefits through the administrative law judge will tell you, man, I'm glad I stuck with this. Not only do I get those 2 years, but this was the only way that they were able to see, from my perspective, why I was disabled. Good calls. This terminology basically goes back to the fact of individuals that will might have been past that 60-day point. However, are granted different types of grace here in which they can still continue the appeals process. And these are the factors that kind of take place. These are common factors amongst the disability population, as you could probably see. But from that standpoint, I did want to mention that. I'm coming to the end here. I do see that we had a couple posted questions, and I do want to reiterate, let's not get too down in the weeds as far as specific individual cases, because as you can see, as I layered all this together, you can see it just depends. So it looks like there is, as of right now in the Q&A, we do have 7 questions. Okay. Now I am remiss. I went basically 24 minutes past the time that I should have. I said this would take about 45 minutes. But from this standpoint, if you could do me a huge favor, I'm going to come back after everything's done, because I've already messed up timing and time frames and all that kind of stuff. So what I am going to do is I'm going to look at the questions as the other presentations take place. But it is my true pleasure, because this agency is so essential to Social Security, helping people navigate this complicated process. This is Dale Verchick. She is from the Protection and Advocacy of Beneficiaries of Social Security. Wonderful, wonderful new friend of mine that I enjoy working with quite a bit. Without further ado, Dale, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frank. I appreciate that. And yes, we look forward to working very closely with Social Security, and Frank has been wonderful. So I'm just going to wait till Frank stops sharing his screen, and I'm going to share mine and just talk to you a little bit more about what we do as Pennsylvania's Protection and Advocacy Agency. So my name is Dale Verchick. I am, as Frank introduced me, the PABS coordinator. I'm also one of the advocates there. And so I'm just going to get straight into my presentation. It's not going to be as long as Frank's, I promise. So I'm just going to go straight into who we are, what we do, and kind of go from there. So Disability Rights Pennsylvania, I have my information down there. I'm the PABS advocate. That's my email address and my phone number. I will have contact information at the end of the presentation. So basically, we are the Protection and Advocacy Agency for the state of Pennsylvania. The Protection and Advocacy, often called the PNA system, really was a concept that developed after Willowbrook. And Willowbrook is a program that was a state institution for people with intellectual disabilities on Staten Island in New York. And back in 1971, Geraldo Rivera had conducted an investigative report, and he exposed some abuse and neglect and lack of programming at this place. And there's a YouTube video that link that I put in there, which you'll have. You can actually even just kind of Google it and type in Willowbrook and Geraldo investigative report, and you'll see several videos on that. I will caution people that the video is graphic. There's a lot of footage on really deplorable conditions. Very many children who are not without clothes and just in very poor conditions. So I just wanted to kind of preface that by saying that it is a graphic video. Very sad. So what happened was, after that particular investigative report, it really galvanized legislation to be enacted to create the P&A system. And so we have this federally mandated system, the Protection and Advocacy P&A system, in each state and territory. And they're intended to provide protection of the rights of people with disabilities through legally based advocacy. And over the years, what has happened is, there's services that are not only now provided to folks living in facilities with intellectual or developmental disabilities, but now we include a lot of advocacy services for people with mental illness or other disabilities. We help folks who are trying to get vocational rehabilitation services. So really, the P&A system has become this force for positive change to ensure that individuals with disabilities are exercising their rights to make choices, to contribute to society, and to live independently. So the P&As, the Protection and Advocacy Agencies, we do receive federal funding and other funding to carry out our mission. And really, it has prompted, like the work that we do has prompted state and local support for advocacy on behalf of people with disabilities, and really expanded from this really narrow initial focus on institutional care to a more broader service to folks with disabilities who want to be part of community and be productive individuals. The next slide, it talks about us, Disability Rights Pennsylvania. We are Pennsylvania's P&A, a protection and advocacy agency. So we're an independent nonprofit corporation under Section 501c3. We are designated by the governor as Pennsylvania's protection and advocacy system under federal mandate. So like I said before, every single state and territory in the United States has a P&A system. So we are it for Pennsylvania. This is our mission. To protect and advocate for rights of people with disabilities so that they may live the lives they choose, free from abuse, neglect, discrimination, and segregation. And essentially, we want to see a Commonwealth, very simply, where people of all abilities are equal and free. Very simple, right? But, a lot of barriers to cross to get there. The next slide here talks about how we serve the community. So we educate. We do a lot of education of people about their rights. We have an intake process. Folks can call in, they can email us. We have presentations like this. We want to ensure folks have choice and that they make choices that are informed. Excuse me. We monitor facilities for safety. We monitor state and county disability programs to ensure appropriate delivery of services. We educate legislators and policymakers to bring positive change in public policy. And we provide legal support. So people will call us through our intake process or email us about issues that they have. And we have a great team of attorneys at Disability Rights Pennsylvania and a great team of advocates. We work very collaboratively together and try to bring about change. And through our social media, through our websites, we share success stories. We see a lot of success out there, and we do this to unite community and to inspire change. So that's basically what we do to serve community. And how we do it is through our various programs. Like I said, we are funded federally. And so these are the different programs. We have many, many programs because we serve folks with all kinds of disabilities. So we have, and I'm just going to rush through them quickly. We have PAD that serves folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, PAMI for mental illness, PAIR basically. I always say anything that doesn't fit in the others kind of goes into PAIR. We do have an assistive technology grant. I have bolded their PABs because that's what I'm going to talk about since I coordinate that grant. We do a lot of work in voting. We help folks with traumatic brain injury. A newer program is the REPI program, which is the Protection for Social Security Beneficiaries under the Protection for Social Security's Beneficiaries Act. So folks who have issues with their REPIs will contact us for help. The WIPA, which is huge, which is the Benefits Counseling Program, is what we have at Disability Rights Pennsylvania for some of the counties here in Pennsylvania. And I haven't listed the counties here, but if you go onto our website, it will tell you what counties our WIPA serves. And then a very new program is helping folks with COVID-19 vaccine access. So as you can see, we have various programs. So it's very broad what we can do to help folks with disabilities in the state. PABS is Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries of Social Security. And that's exactly what it is right there. Just a little history on what we are and how we came about. So PABS was established under the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act. The Ticket to Work, what Frank was talking about, is one of the programs. It's a bigger program. And PABS is basically funded by this grant under Social Security Administration to help protect the rights of beneficiaries of SSI and SSDI who want to go back to work. So oftentimes, so essentially what happened was when this particular program was established, you had all these work incentives out there that Frank talked about, but it only goes as far as the employment, right? So people unfortunately were seeing barriers within their own workplaces where they were not granted accommodations, they were not allowed to do certain things, or they were not given equal access or opportunity. So of course, they couldn't work then, and they couldn't use those work incentives. So that's why Congress decided, okay, let's create this new program under PABS. And the purpose of PABS is to ensure, healthcare, make sure folks are prepared, that they have appropriate placement, that that they have Medicaid availability to them, Medicare is available to them, and any kind of services and supports that they need to obtain employment and to reduce their dependency on cash benefits. Because like Frank said, you can kind of get stuck in the cycle of like, okay, you can stay under your trial work period and just continue to get those benefits. But I'm just going to say it out loud here and bluntly, that's you can also continue to just stay in poverty in that sense. So a lot of people have found that when they do go to work and they reduce their dependency on those cash benefits, that they're able to do much more, and they want to do much more. So people will call us when they are in need of help to overcome barriers to employment. Like I explained, the denial of reasonable accommodations. We look at issues related to transition from school to work. So folks will call us if they have any issues, if they have concerns, if questions about their IEP, whether their transition is working or not working. Folks once they've graduated and are in a post-secondary education system, they will contact us and say, okay, I'm not being accommodated for whatever reason. So our attorneys will look at those issues. issues around supported and customized employment. So the list goes on. We can look at various things that are barriers to work. So to be served under the PABS grant, a person who contacts us needs to be a beneficiary and needs to be experiencing an employment barrier. That's not to say that if a person who contacts us is experiencing a barrier to work, we can't serve them under a different grant, but to be served under the PABS grant, because all our work is very grant specific, they have to be a beneficiary and they have to be experiencing a barrier to work. And again, like post-secondary education, that could be a barrier to work, or transition service could be a barrier to the person getting educated to go back to go to work. But like I said, it doesn't have to be that the person, if a person is not receiving Social Security benefits and they are being discriminated or facing any kind of barrier to work, they can still call us and we can serve them under a different grant. So these are some of the PABS systemic advocacy things that we look at. Frank talked about the Ticket to Work programs. So, we look at on a systemic level if there is policy that might be discriminatory or just not working, not equitable. We look at those issues to see how we can educate legislators, how we can educate policymakers on how we can make them better. We look at issues around OVR, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and other employment networks. People will call us sometimes and say, I'm working with X, Y, and Z employment network. I'm not receiving whatever services that I was promised. And sometimes it's just an issue of miscommunication, and so I'll kind of contact them and say to them, okay, like let's see what's going on here. And very often it's resolved in a day. So we look at any kinds of issues that inhibit competitive, integrated, and meaningful employment, which is a big thing. You hear that a lot now in the employment arena: competitive, integrated, meaningful employment, because we want everybody to be working competitively, to earning a real wage, to be in real work, to be integrated, and to love what they're doing. And they can do that only if it's there as an option to them. So we look at those issues, and we have attorneys who can provide information about the Family Medical Leave Act, which is FMLA there in acronyms, or FLSA, which is a Fair Labor Standard Act, Federal Contractors Section 503. I am not an attorney. I should have prefaced the presentation by saying that I'm a non-attorney advocate. So I'm not going to be able to answer any legal questions, but you can certainly call Disability Rights if you have legal questions and you need legal advice. And I have here our contact information. Like I said, we work closely with folks who are beneficiaries because we want to make sure that if they have these great work incentives afforded to them, that they are not experiencing any barriers to be employed. And so obviously our attorneys will look at different situations. We're well known for writing of strongly worded letters to folks, but we really are kind, I promise. But we want to educate folks on rights and educate people on how important it is to allow people with all abilities to be part of our community. So that's it from me. I'm going to look to see if I have any questions here. I don't have any questions here, I guess. They don't look like any for me. So I'm going to introduce Nancy. Nancy is a benefits counselor at Achieva, and she's going to provide us with some great information on Medicaid waivers, Medicare, and some very, very important information on how we could apply or use those great work incentives to go back to work. So I'm going to stop sharing right here.
This is Nancy McMillan. I have Leanne Felina with me also. And if you can access our PowerPoint, and I'm going to actually go through the PowerPoint fairly quickly because I've learned from Frank that you can be very concise and specific and go into detail, but do it quickly. So that's what I'm going to do in order to be able to cover all my material, but also end on time so that we have lots of time for questions, and I'm sure there'll be many. So if you don't mind turning to the very second page, employment benefits counseling are who we are. Leanne, of course, Matt. Matt was gracious enough to put together the PowerPoint for Achieva, myself, and then Marisol Little. So we all have a part to play in this presentation today. So with our counseling effort, we started this program about 6 years ago, formally, officially, through a grant from United Way of Southwestern PA. And we had partners, and our partners are fabulous, by the way, and we work very closely with them. And we've also worked very closely through Social Security, the public affairs specialists, similar to Frank, in our area. So across Pennsylvania, there are geographic areas where you can access someone like Frank for a public affairs specialist, and you can have ongoing communication with that person. So I just want to make you aware of that across Pennsylvania. So what is our goal? Of course, is to provide comprehensive assistance to individuals with disabilities to maintain their government benefits while working or seeking employment. So many individuals, as Frank said, they want to work, but they're worried that there'll be a negative effect on their benefits, including their health care insurance. So medical assistance is a state provided program, and we actually are targeting today 5 areas of Medicaid. Medical assistance is the same as Medicaid. It's children with special needs through the PH95 MA coverage up to the age of 18. We'll talk about that. Medical assistance for workers with disabilities between the ages of 16 through 64. Healthy Horizons, a very common, most frequently used category of medical assistance, Healthy Horizons. And then, of course, something called the Medicare Savings Program. Another name is Buy-In, where people can have their Part B as in boy, premium paid for by Medicaid. And then lastly are the waivers. And to me, this is the most exciting category that we're going to be covering today, because the waivers came into existence, not long ago, maybe 30 years ago, and it was a game changer in everybody's lives who had a disability. So the waivers are very important, and we'll spend more time on the waivers. So children with special needs getting medical assistance through the PH95 receive full Medicaid up to the age of 18. They do have to meet a disability requirement, and they cannot be on SSI. This is considered a loophole insurance, and the question is why? Well, it's loophole because these particular children become eligible for medical assistance only after they do not fit into any other category. So it's the last category of resort in the PA Medicaid system. And only the child's income is counted, not the parents. So again, this is a great category to be in for children with a disability up to the age of 18. The parent's income is not counted, their resources are not counted, only the child's income is counted. So children in this category can be placed presumptively into this Medicaid program. They do not need verification of disability through Social Security. They are strictly reviewed to the Department of Human Services. There is documentation required for their medical condition, documenting their severity of the impairment. Sometimes it's an IEP, sometimes it's a medical report. And there are income and resource eligibility. So for income, only the child's income counts. And being under the age of 18, they're not working. They might have a very small volunteer or part-time job that does pay a wage, but it would be very small and very minimal for a child who's under the age of 18. But it does include some employment, so sometimes they do work internships through their IEP program. And they might even have unearned income, and that's when somebody pays voluntary child support, not through the court, which requires child support, but it's a voluntary child support. So there are two types of income that are accounted for this program. The resources, the resources are really not counted. So we'll just go on to the next category or the next step, and that's whenever there is a termination reaching age 18 of the PH 95, they will be placed into another category called Healthy Horizons for 90 days. And this is a transition period for this child. So we don't want them to be left without Medicaid the moment they turn 18. Instead, the system is set up so that for 90 days, they'll have a transition period where they'll continue to get medical assistance through the Healthy Horizons program. At this time, the family and the adult child will be expected to apply for SSI. And while that determination is being made, because, getting SSI might take 2 to 3 to 4 months, the child's MA coverage will continue under Healthy Horizons. So medical assistance for workers with disabilities. This is the next great category that many of our clients use who want to work and are working. So it provides complete health coverage. It provides an incentive to work, because you'll see in a minute that there's higher income and resource guidelines. And they can also continue to receive Medicare. If a person's already receiving Medicare, they can have their premium paid for by Department of Human Services. So what is MAUD? It's medical assistance for workers with disabilities between the ages of 16 through 64. A person has to be disabled according to, Social Security standards or a state standard called medical review team. They have to be employed and receiving some type of income. It could be from minimum wage on up. So in Pennsylvania, I believe the minimum wage is still $7.50, but it could be higher than that. And there's no required minimum work hours. The work hours can be anywhere from 1 hour a month on up. Generally, people like to work, more than 1 hour. So they might put in for, 4 hours, 10 hours a month, or even more. But there are no minimum work hours to become eligible for medical assistance for workers with disability. But there are income requirements and there are resource requirements. So let's go to the next slide. For MAUD income requirements, they do, for a single person, the cap is $3,038 per month. And for a married couple, it's higher, $4,109 a month. The income of the spouse, whether the spouse is applying or not, is counted. So DHS, Department of Human Services, will apply a 2-person household limit in determining eligibility for the married person. SSI-related deductions that Frank talked about are applied to determine eligibility. So these deductions are the $20 plus the $65 for a total of $85 a month that can be reduce the gross income. It's disregarded, this $85. And then the balance of their gross income after the reductions are divided by 2. So essentially what we're saying is that for MAUD, they're going to basically reduce your amount of your earnings each month by $85 that are being counted, reduce what that countable income is, and then divide by 2. So looking at 1/2 of the balance. So that's a great advantage. So when you look at that amount of $3,038, a person can actually earn twice that much each month. So you're really looking at about $6,000 per month, because to bring it, they'll only look at 1/2 of it to bring it down to qualify for MAUD. But there's a resource limit, and whether you're married or single, the resource limit is $10,000 a month. So you cannot exceed the $10,000 resource cap. So again, it's the married person as well as the person who's applying for the MAUD category. The resources are still counted, even if children with disabilities are under 21. Let's go on to the next slide. So with MAUD, there are benefits to that, which I said, but there's a small premium that you must pay. It's only 5% of the countable income. So they look at your net income after the deductions. They start with your gross income before taxes, but then they reduce it by the $85 a month. And then they look at 1/2 of what's left over. And they base your 5% premium charged on that 1/2 that's already reduced. So your countable income tends to be very low when you look at the 5%, and it's a bargain. It's the same type of healthcare plan that you would have under Healthy Horizons. So you keep your same doctors when you transition from Healthy Horizons to MAUD. You keep your same doctors, you keep your same hospital settings, same everything, same plan. You just now pay a 5% premium. So when both spouses are applicants, each premium is determined by their own net income. So you could have a husband and wife, both disabled, being on MAUD, and the premium is only based on the spouse, the individual spouse, not both spouses. Can MAUD be retroactive coverage? Absolutely. So there's a 3-month retroactive coverage. Again, you must meet the requirements for MAUD, work requirements for the retroactive months, and be able to pay those premiums, that 5% premium for those 3-month period. So if you incurred any medical bills while you're waiting for MAUD to become approved and active, save those bills. Don't pay on them. Don't even pay a penny on them. Save those bills and then submit them to MAUD. They'll go back those 90 days. Make sure that you were working those 90 days as required, and then not pay any money towards those bills. So what's coming up? There was a brand new category called WJS, Workers with Job Success. It's a new category that was actually voted on and approved probably a year ago, but is not, because of the pandemic, it was not implemented. So it's for individuals on MAUD for 12 consecutive months that continue to meet all the eligibility, except now they're earning too much money. So they can jump or transition into WJS after 12 months of being on MAUD. And for one person, their income can be $7,290 a month gross. Isn't that a wonderful tool or a wonderful avenue to use for someone who wants to work, be successful, and still keep their Medicaid? So this is a person who's very worried about losing their medical assistance, can work and still keep it. And with the WJS resource limits, once they're enrolled in WJS, there are no resource limits. And that continues even after they move back into MAUD, that there's no resource limits if they ever had to move back into MAUD. So WJS will begin after the COVID-19 protections ends on 4/1/2023. So that's when people like yourself, who's ever watching this program, can actually apply for the WJS if you've been on MAUD for 12 straight months and you now want to earn over that other cap of $3,000. I'm going to look at it real quickly just so you know, $3,038 a month. Okay, so let's go into the Medicare Savings Program. I just might gloss over this more quickly because this is a very unique population that has Medicare and Medicaid. So the state of Pennsylvania can pay for their premium Part B, B as in boy, under the Medicare Savings Program, and it's often called the buy-in. So there's 4 levels of the Medicare Savings Program. The Healthy Horizons, we call it the QMB Plus, the Qualified Medicare Beneficiary, QMB, the Specified Low Income Medicare Beneficiary, the SLIMB, SLMB, and then the Qualifying Individual. So let's switch over to the next slide. And Healthy Horizons is probably the most popular one that to get their Part
Hold on one
B
second. This is
paid.
the
Oh, yes,
slide.
yes. We want to do the Part D plan. I'm sorry. That's an excellent plan also.
Frank, did you want to talk about that for a second?
He might not be
Yes.
on.
Yeah. No,
There
no,
you-
I'm
Okay.
joined. Great information, by the way. The reason I wanted to touch upon the extra help for Medicare Part D, great program, but individuals do apply through their Social Security office. In general, the state also provides a specific form to apply, and in so doing, you apply for both state benefits and potential eligibility for Medicare Part D. So from that standpoint, there is screening from both ends. However, the extra help for Medicare Part D, there's a lot tied to this now, and a lot of rules that have changed with this since the Inflation Reduction Act was instituted last year. So, number one, an individual that might have previously applied for this program, which is basically designed to assist low-income individuals afford specific types of prescriptions. And many times an extra help Medicare D subsidy plan is given to an individual for little to no cost. And in turn, depending on the types of medications they take, they can get those for little to no cost. But some of these benefits that you're hearing about related to the Inflation Reduction Act, and this is all very, very new, will potentially be tied to this program. I'm pretty certain that they will be tied to this program. So this will include the max to out-of-pocket prescription drug cost, and maybe the insulin. Now, there's lots of changes. Like I said, it just passed late last year. But the most important thing I wanted to talk about today is that the income levels for this program have increased from 150% above poverty to 130%, pardon me, to 150%. And as a result of that, you might have individuals that were previously denied for this program now being eligible. So this is going to be something that's kind of in the forethought. You're going to see this in the headlines a good bit as we go over. But if you maybe have a contact with an older individual, many times as Nancy had indicated, this is a special group of individuals. More times than not, they are going to be older individuals that might have been denied on a previous occasion. We should be back to referring people for potential eligibility. And as I stated before, that can take place at the State Assistance Office, the Human Services Office, or at the Social Security Office. So if you have mom or dad, or you have a neighbor, or someone that has very limited income, and this also corresponds a lot of times with maybe individuals that have had something that like a specific event, like losing a spouse, some type of event tied to changing their income dramatically. This is very, very beneficial, especially as it relates to individuals that aren't getting a lot of money per month in their Social Security.
Right. Thank you, Frank. That was excellent. And let me just add one more thing about the Part D program in Pennsylvania. And I believe this is unique to Pennsylvania. If you're dual eligible, receiving Medicare and Medicaid at the same time, you automatically get the Part D subsidy. So it should be it should be highlighted and flagged in your system and in the Medicaid system as being dual eligible for this person, and that they automatically should get the Part D subsidy without having to do a paper application. Now, sometimes there's glitches, so you have to be careful, that you're following your paperwork. Any mail that's mailed to you, make sure you're reading it carefully. Call the medical assistance office if you have any questions, or even call the Social Security office. Make sure that you are designated in both systems as being dual eligible for the Part D subsidy. Frank, does that make sense? Okay.
Perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
Good. Okay. So the nice thing about the Part D help program in Pennsylvania is that they only count 1/2 of your earned income. So you start again with your gross income. It's reduced by this $85, and then it's 1/2 of that amount in order to determine if you're not dual eligible, to determine do you qualify for the full subsidy or there's a partial subsidy. So that's getting into a lot of details, but always apply. Even if you think you might not qualify initially, like Frank was saying, the rules are changing, the amounts are changing. Always apply anyway, because you just might be very pleasantly surprised that you do qualify this year. Okay, let's go on. Oh yeah, we are in the Healthy Horizons. It's the most common. Okay, so it's full Medicaid coverage for individuals 65 and older with individuals receiving this category. They qualify for the MA payments and the Part B premiums and payment of your Medicare deductibles and coinsurance. So when you get bills from providers, medical providers, this is going to be your biggest savings. You're not going to be paying Medicare deductibles and coinsurance. You're not going to be paying that premium every month. This is the best category to be in, the QMB plus. But if you don't qualify for this category, then you could be placed into the next one. And that's the healthy, well, keep going. Yeah, the qualified Medicare beneficiary QMB. So again, this is you have to put in a paper application or you can go on Compass, but either way, you have to apply for these programs. You can't, this is something you just can't do through Social Security. You have to do it through the Compass program or doing the paper application that you download off of the website for DHS. So another category, the Medicare Savings Program is the low income, the Slim B. Many individuals do qualify for this, so it does pay for your Part B premium only. Doesn't cover the co-insurance and co-pays, but it does cover your $164.90 a month Part B premium. And then the very last one is the Q1-1. Again, this pays for Part B premium, but it does not include full Medicaid benefits. There's higher income limits, but be aware that it does not come with full Medicaid. So someone who needs full Medicaid benefits and is on the waiver, for example, should never go into this category, the Q1-1, because you never want to lose your waiver. Okay, what are waiver services? Because I'm a big fan of them. I wanted everybody to know this. The federal government, it all started back 30 years ago when the federal government was forced, actually it was through advocacy, but the rules changed and they were forced to waive the Medicaid rules for institutional care for the state, Pennsylvania, to utilize the same funds to provide supports and services for people in their communities rather than in the institutions. So the money that would have been paying for them to stay in institutions was then diverted to the community so that they could move out of the institutions into the community, into their own apartments, homes, back to their families, maybe into group homes or community living arrangements. Other settings, other residential settings rather than institutions. And guess what? It worked. These institutions were shut down one by one. There's just a couple open maybe in the whole state of Pennsylvania where institutions are being used to house people. But most of them, and I'm going to guess it's close to 90% of them, have moved back into the community because these waivers make it possible for them to get supports and services with the money and the funds coming half from federal dollars and half from state dollars that are channeled down through the state and then through the county to be able to expend them or spend the money on their programs, their services and supports. So those requirements were waived, and now we're in the next slide for the waiver income limits. So there is a waiver income cap of $2,742 a month gross. Only the applicant's income is counted, not other people's. So just the applicants, not the spouse and not the siblings, not the children, not anyone else's, just the applicants. But however, there's no income deductions or incentives like that $85 and then counting 1/2 of what's left over. There's no type of incentives or income deductions for the waiver program. But if you are over the income limit of that $2,742, guess what? You can be reviewed for MAUD, and the MAUD would take you up to that $3,037 a month. So that gives you that extra leeway of having more income than you're typically allowed for waiver. It allows you to go up to the MAUD level, and even with the $10,000 resource level. So with waiver resource limits, it's typically 8,000. If you're in MAUD, it's 10,000. And it's higher. Those waiver resource limits are higher if you're married, and they use spousal impoverishment rules. I personally don't establish those rules. It's usually done by DHS, Department of Human Services, and maybe through an elder law attorney.
And generally, it's a equation that's basically set each year, because the idea is that they don't want to leave a community spouse with no resources in the community to live just because another spouse is struggling
Yes.
with the financial burden of a disability.
Yes. And Leanne, by the way, is an attorney, and she used to do a lot of these cases of disability, determining spousal impoverishment. So this is a critical feature about the waiver. So keep that in mind. If you know somebody who's married, the spouse is earning quite a bit of money, or their resources are too high, they can actually be reconsidered through the spousal impoverishment rules. Now with waiver, there is a typical 5-year look back period to determine if the applicant sold or gave away resources for less than fair market value. That's if you had a house and you decide to sell it to your son or daughter for $1. That would be less than fair market value. But anything you spent in the past 5 years on yourself, on your disability, particularly your personal needs, and just paying for caregivers or whatever it was, those are legitimate expenses in the past 5 years. But the gist of this is that you need to save your bank statements. You need to save all your receipts and your bank statements for the past 5 years. If you're anticipating applying for waiver, or keep in mind, if you're anticipating having to go into a nursing home, because there's the same 5-year look back, whether you go onto the waiver program or you go into a nursing home.
And just to add to that, I think when you look at that, a lot of families, if the gifting has already occurred, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to wait the 5 years. There are certain things that you can do with regard to attempting to reverse those.
Yes.
And also with regard to not just reversing it, but some families, maybe if the gift was 4 years ago,
Yes.
if you can go another year and then the 5 years are up, so some people just end up applying maybe a little bit later than they would have if the gift, depending on when the gifting occurred.
Right. Thank you. That's perfect. Okay. There's really 2 different categories of waiver, the home and community. These are all home and community based waivers, but the first one is called the ODP waiver, Office of Developmental Programs that run these waivers. It's the second one that we're going to talk about is the Community Health Choices waiver through the Office of Long-Term Living. So the ODP waiver is devoted or dedicated to intellectual developmental disability and people with autism. So it could be any age. There's 3 levels of this type of waiver: the consolidated, the person family directed, and the community living waiver. There's a 4th level of this, but with a different age. It's age 21 and above, and that's the adult autism waiver, but it falls under the ODP. So the budget caps are quite generous. For the first level, which is person family directed support waiver, the budget cap is up to $41,000. The community living waiver, if you're in this waiver or striving to get into it, the budget cap is $85,000. And if for some reason you're in a consolidated waiver, whether you're living in a community living arrangement like a group home, or you're in your own home with your family or other individuals who are taking care of you, there is no budget cap, and it's strictly based on need. So those three categories are very important because basically they're all based on your needs, and it has to be documented. So waiver is not typically immediately available. We would like it to be. So when you're graduating from high school, you're at the age of 18, 19, 20, or 21, you would like to move directly into a waiver program. Or if you didn't get that opportunity and you're 25 or 30 or 35, you need to get on a waiting list because it's not going to be given to you unless it's an emergency. So you have to fill out a form when you register called Prioritization of Urgency of Need for Services. It's called the PUNS. I think you've probably heard of that. And it's questions that they ask you. These PUNS have very detailed questions regarding the types of supports and services that you need to be safe and secure in the community. So it creates the waiting list. The PUNS will assist the county in understanding and planning your future with a waiver. And what category do you fall into? So there are three categories of needs that define this urgency. Emergency, which requires immediate services for you. Critical, which are services needed within 2 years, looking at the next 2 years, or planning ahead, services needed within 2 to 5 years. And you can transition between these categories due to your life circumstances. And what I wanted to bring out just very, very quickly, like when people are transitioning, they're reaching milestones. So one transition could be graduating from high school, going into the community. Another transition is when you're getting employment for the first time after graduation, and you need a job coach ongoingly, not just through 3 months through OVR, but you need a job coach for the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Waiver will pay for job coaching also. So these are transition stages that you go through. For example, a parent who ages to the point where they can't care for you anymore. If a parent has to go into a nursing home, or if a parent dies, these are critical times that will push you into the emergency stage of getting onto waiver very quickly. So you have to be in touch with your support coordination unit. And I can't emphasize enough that you have to have ongoing communication with your support coordinator monthly. I'm going to say at least once a month, to engage in a conversation, to let them know, particularly if your child is approaching graduation, that they need the waiver. It's just so important. I can't emphasize enough how that communication has to continue throughout the child's lifetime, because there's going to be needs and changes in that child's life, in you as a parent. If you move out of state, if you don't take the child with you and they remain in Pennsylvania, they have to have housing. They have to be placed in housing that's safe and secure. So the waiver fits the needs of your child, starting, early. I'm going to say generally it's upon graduation from high school, and it's through the rest of their life. So they could be reaching the age of 60 or 65, and they could have health issues, and their health conditions are deteriorating to the point where they need more supports. So they could actually go from the one waiver level, which is the PFDS, into the next waiver level, and then finally into the ultimate waiver level, which is the consolidated. So let's look at the ODP. What do they pay for? Well, self-care. Self-care is just about everything, isn't it? So it could be ADLs, activities of daily living. It could be your, helping with all your personal needs, eating, dressing, bathing or showering, getting in and out of bed, walking safely, using equipment correctly, toileting needs, and so forth. It also covers your health maintenance, your medication, who gives you your medications, your doctor appointments, taking you to doctor's appointments, getting your therapies done, and then seeing the counselors, whether it's mental health counselors or other counselors, when you're supposed to see them. Home management, that could be teaching skills in the home, teaching them to do laundry, cleaning, cooking, doing grocery shopping, making a grocery list, cleaning around your yard, doing yard maintenance, just on a very, minimal level. But home management is very important. Mobility and transportation, having the correct type of wheelchair, whether it's a power chair or not, having to take access or a system of transportation that waiver can pay for, or paying a driver, sometimes Uber, paying for the Uber driver for you to get to work on time or get to your doctor's appointments if you don't have medical transportation paid for, medical access transportation is program is something in Allegheny County that medical assistants will pay for to go to medical appointments. But if you don't have that in your county, then you're going to need the waiver to pay for your transportation, including bus passes. Socialization companion, that can be going out into the community, doing socialization events, going to ball games, movies, having a companion go with you for safety reasons, one-on-one, it could be part of a group, 1-on-4. Also home accessibility and adaptations, maybe for the bathroom, for your wheelchair, widening the doorways or creating or making a ramp to the front door. That's all part of home adaptations. Assistive technology could be your computer, printer, phone, having assistive devices for communication like Dynavox or other devices, having the right software programs put on them. So that's all assistive technology and special therapies, right? In the past few years, the horse or equestrian therapy has become very popular, aquatic swimming therapy, speech and language, PT and OT. And these would be therapies after Medicare and Medicaid quit paying for them. So waiver could pick up some of these therapies, and waiver is the payer of last resort. And it's only after Medicaid and Medicare have stopped paying for them, as I said. Okay, so the process for waiver, you have to get registered first, contact your county MHID office. Every county has one of these offices. You then do the PUNS form. When you apply for the waiver services, you're put on a waiting list. Keep in touch with your service coordinator because she's providing resources and information to you on a monthly basis, or at least should be. And then you finally can enroll in waiver services based on your eligibility. Okay, what's the other category of waiver? It's called Community Health Choices through the Office of Long-Term Living. It's for individuals with physical disabilities who are seeking medical funds for long-term services and supports in the home. It's for people ages 21 and older, and they have to meet the functionality and financial eligibility standards. Okay, so functional eligibility, what is that? It's an individual's ability to, and I'm going to read it off of my sheet, perform certain activities or tasks required for daily living. And what's financial eligibility? Well, income and resource limits that apply, and that includes your income, your bank accounts, your retirement accounts, etc. So, community health choices. You can receive benefits and services through a managed care plan, and that includes primary care, hospital care, specialist and dental care, and community-based services. What are some examples? Well, the list goes on and on and on, but these are the most popular examples of the services and supports that you can get. Non-medical transportation paid for, personal assistance services, skilled nursing services, adult day health programs, employment services and supports through, our program MedAchieva, even personal emergency response system, respite, home adaptations, assistive technology, and vehicle modifications. What's the application process? Well, it's very different than the ODP one that I just talked about a minute ago. You have to contact an independent enrollment broker in Pennsylvania. Here's the central phone number to call them. independent enrollment broker. The second step would be for physician certification. It's a form that you would get from the IEB, and you will return it, or the physician will return it to the IEB. The IEB then visits you, the applicant, and he helps you complete a form called the PA 600L. And then on this form, based on the information that you supply, there will be a determination for your functional level, and that'll be done through the Area Agency on Aging, and that's for your medical and personal level of functioning. And then there will be a review for that by the IEB, and then the final steps will be taken by the County Assistance Office to approve your waiver, and they'll look at both the functional and the financial aspects. Okay, so I glossed over this, the prior information, because I really wanted to include the Social Security disability benefits that someone can receive under Social Security, and Frank is very familiar with this, and it's called the Childhood Disability Benefit, and it's also called the Adult Disability, same as Adult Disabled Child and the Disabled Adult Child. So they have three. Over the years, the names have changed, so it's the same thing. So we'll just call it the DAC, Disabled Adult Child. What's the entitlement? So it's a survivor benefit based on a parent's work history of a biological or adoptive parent. It could be a step parent or grandparent in some situations if they're guardians. And it could be a triggering event such as a death of a parent with a work history, the disability of a parent with the work history. This parent is getting SSDI based on their own disability and work history, or the retirement of this parent who gets Social Security Social Security benefits. So there's three triggering events: the death of a parent, the disability of a parent, and the retirement of a parent. But all three situations have to have a work history attached to that parent. And so the third requirement is there has to be, the fourth, I should say, it has to be an onset of the individual's disability before the age of 22 in order to receive this survivor benefit. And they have to be age 18 or older. So again, what amount do you get? Okay, so we don't know. So it's individualized. So it's based on each wage earner's contributions and the number of dependents who are drawing on that work history. It's also linked to Medicare, A, B, and D, exactly 2 years after a person becomes eligible for this survivor benefit, whether they're age 23 on up to whatever age they are. They're linked to Medicare 2 years after they become eligible. So, and a child who is getting SSI or SSDI prior to age 18 will be redetermined at the age of 18 for this category of benefit, disabled adult child. So what happens when this child decides to marry? Well, if they do marry somebody who's also in a Title II category of retirement survivors or SSDI, then both continue to receive their benefit. But if by chance this person who is a survivor adult, getting SSDI as a survivor adult child, if they marry someone not in the Title II category of being a recipient, then they would terminate or lose their benefit, their survivor adult child benefit. So just want to make you aware of that. They could possibly lose it. So what are the excluded resources from Medicaid, SSI, and waivers? What could be the excluded resources are house or a condo. As long as the person lives in that house or condo, they can own it. They can own one car. They can own a prepaid irrevocable burial trust or account. And keep in mind that when it's irrevocable, it's not counted, but that trust plan that you develop either with your funeral director, usually that's how it is, or you have it through a medical insurance or a insurance policy, but the plan should include everything that's needed for burial, all funeral arrangements, casket, grave liners, opening, closing of grave, flowers, gratuities. The list goes on. And I'm not as much concerned about that as I am that people tend to put it off. They tend to postpone this prepaid irrevocable burial plan. Don't do that. Don't do that. Have it done. If you have the money, put the money towards it. It's irrevocable, so it's not going to be counted as a resource, and you never know when you need it. So you're doing you're doing your adult child a favor by guiding them into this irrevocable burial plan or trust. So that's just my little bit of information.
And again, that could be expanded when you're talking about between spouses that are elderly.
Right.
Sometimes those exclusions are different depending on if the assets held are IRAs as opposed to
Yes.
401ks and those type of things. So always keep that in mind. It may be a little different if you're talking about yourself as opposed to your child.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. So we do have a link for you, and this is a fabulous link. It was developed by the Pennsylvania Health Law Project as a resource library for you to print out almost everything we talked about today, or everything that I talked about today. So it's all state Medicaid oriented articles that you can download. Go into this link, and there's probably at least 10 of them that you can download to learn more about everything that I just mentioned in the past 45 minutes. So don't lose this link. Share it, pass it on to other people. If you're a professional, I would go ahead and download every single article that you can find there. If you're a parent or an individual with a disability, just download and print out the articles that pertain to you.
And I do believe Patty is going to share the slides from today with you. So you should have that link in it if you didn't have the opportunity to copy it down.
Right. So questions, again, we're at the very end, so we're open to questions. I know Frank will be answering his questions first, and then we'll be able to answer our questions after him and after Dale. So,
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that great information. Really appreciate it. And of course, to Dale and Frank as well. So as Nancy said, we'll start with Frank. I think a lot of the questions are for him. So Frank, if you can see the questions, right?
I can. I'm looking at them right now.
So start at the top, and,
Yep.
and if it's your question, answer it. If it's not your question, then we'll skip over it and answer all your stuff first, and then go back to the other questions.
Fantastic. First question I have is, how are the benefits affected when a person receiving both SSI and disability reach the full Social Security age? So what we could consider full retirement age is actually in the midst of changing right now. In general, for most people, it will be age 67, but for individuals that have been on benefits previous to then, it's incremental between age 66 and 67. What is notable about this age is if a person is receiving disability benefits and they reach their full retirement age, they are basically moved to the retirement trust fund. And at that point, this is if even if you're receiving retirement early, you basically have no earnings limit that are related to the disability rules, or even any earnings limit that are related to the retirement rules. Because an individual that's receiving retirement benefits from age 60 through 67 have certain earnings limits much different than what I discussed about during my presentation. So that is from the Social Security standpoint. Now, as far as SSI is concerned, you will have basically a lot of the provisions that I was talking about, but since SSI is a needs-based federal welfare program, what you're going to encounter is that many of the income and resource rules are still apply whether a person is age 62 or age 69 due to the nature of that program. So you might have a situation where a person returns to work, they lose their SSI benefits, but are able to work and earn as much money as they like and still receive what we now consider their retirement benefits because they transitioned from disability at age 67. So this is a really nice interface here. Can you talk about how Social Security calculates on a monthly basis is it a calendar or pay period based? It's very confusing and convoluted process, and I couldn't agree more. And it varies from SSI to Social Security, but it's typically done on a monthly basis. Now, for SSI, we always count the date in which the benefit is received. So for that reason, the biweekly, weekly, what have you, we're always looking at the day in which the benefit is paid. Pardon me, the paycheck or earned income is probably the best term. Now, Social Security is a little bit more nuanced than this when we're trying to break down the monthly amounts of the earned income. However, basically, there's sometimes depending on how close they are to substantial gainful activity and income related work expenses, they might be instead of SSI taking the entirety of a paycheck and only counting when it's paid, the Social Security might break down a paycheck to divide like a specific pay period over 2 months as it relates to determining whether or not someone was over substantial gainful activity or even in computing trial work months, so on and so forth. How do you submit an IRWI if you start work after SSI has started? Income related work expenses are typically reported on an 820 or 821, and typically income related work expenses are more related to Social Security. When my slides kind of touched on the SSI process, these are more done when the SSI technician is evaluating earnings and posting those. And most of the time, this is something we're either going to document through a pay stub or maybe a report completed by the employer. So a lot of times when it comes to SSI, they're going to identify the need to potentially exclude some of the income, some of the earned income in order to, but we would verify that either through pay stubs or through the employer. Okay. And how often do they have SSA 821 reviews? What the terminology here is a work continuing disability review, and it depends on the individual. So depending on the disability code that the Disability Determination Service or administrative law judge applies to the individual, they can be every 3, 5, 7 years. Depending on the severity of the disability, an individual might not even have to, especially if they haven't returned to work. And in those cases, those medical cases, it can be easy as a questionnaire, or they might have to kind of do a similar disability process in which they provide, recent medical evidence to make those determinations. But back specifically to continuing disability reviews as it relates to work, it's either 3, 5, or 7 years, or the 821 can be completed when a person starts working. So during a work reporting time frame, because that form is used to identify income related work expenses and other types of situations as it relates. So really, I guess the simple answer to that is it depends, but I hope I gave some better answers as far as that is concerned. And we have a question: what is the income limit with SSI to get help with Medicare costs? It was covered during the state presentation. I'm going to leave that for Nancy. So I'm going to leave that up on the list here. You suggested that an individual wait till they first have a paycheck. What is the time requirement? I.e., how long do you have to report work? In the current environment, you can get an appointment within the time requirement. So phenomenal question on a couple different levels. So basically, when I was talking about this during my presentation, I was trying to make the distinction between, first getting the news delivered of, hey, I got the job. So that happened a lot. A person would come in to report those types of things. And then, of course, we're going through, kind of how much are you making an hour? How much do you plan to work? So on and so forth. So in response to your question, I would basically say after the first full month of work is completed, the person will have the necessary pay stubs, and then would report that. So I guess in general, 30 days is a good option. But like I said, it makes for a better experience of reporting work when they have a lot of these quantifiable information to kind of answer back. A person that reports work does not have to do so with an appointment. They can go into the field offices. The Social Security field offices have been reopened for since April 7th of 2022, open 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. There are general inquiry lines that are assigned to each of the field offices. A person can even report work over the telephone. And what takes place a lot of times through work reporting like this is, in some cases, especially as it relates to supplemental security income, is that there can be estimates put into the system to anticipate future work from taking place so that the benefit can be deducted while the person reports or gives us the pay stubs. Back to supplemental security income specifically, there is a different processes of counting earned income, and in general, an individual's earned income is not counted until the month after the month. And this is nice from a reporting standpoint. So let's use March as an example. So a person will report to us at the beginning of April what they made for the entirety of March. And sometimes it's going to be even to be done without pay stubs. If a person is able to, add up their specific gross income. So the beginning of April, an individual specific to SSI reports wages to us. And by the middle of April, they're able to be notified what their benefit will be for May. So March's determines May, but that's not across the board. That's if a person is reducing the benefit enough where they still receive the benefit. In some cases, they can reset a clock known as CMA and can make themselves ineligible for a specific period of time. Now, I think I addressed everything there. I encourage people to contact their field offices. Their field offices, not the 1-800 number, but their field offices. Always listed as the secondary number on Google. You can find them on Office Locator, but also going into the field office, they can be done so without a appointment. Can a person with savings in a bank from an inheritance still receive disability payments for Social Security disability insurance, the one that individuals are working and paying into? There are no resource limits as it relates to that. Now, Nancy gave you a great presentation of potential medical assistance implications as it relates to an inheritance or a resource, but the person that's hosting this presentation is probably a great resource because then you could start to potentially involve trust accounts. And I'm by no means an expert as far as this is concerned, but inheritances sometimes can be directed into a trust account so that that inheritance as a resource, both for Social Security and medical assistance benefits, can be exempted. So, from that standpoint, most of the time, inheritances are going to be most directed at individuals that get supplemental security income or individuals that are potentially getting medical assistance benefits. So if there is some anticipation of an inheritance coming up on the horizon, Achieve a Family Trust or a local Social Security office are really good resources as far as making those contacts in anticipation of these things, because there are different rules. And I hope you got a little bit of an appreciation during the state presentation of how we count those resources. And they don't always have to create a situation of ineligibility.
And Frank, I think you raise an excellent point there with regard to contact our benefits counseling if you're even thinking about that, because we can definitely work on other methods other than the things that we're talking about today through either our future planning department, through our trust department, even sometimes through our residual department. We can help out with things like that as well. Nice.
Very, very cool. So the next two I'm going to leave for Nancy, the autism waiver and what happens after the 90 days with Healthy Horizon. Can can you talk about the benefits of working and how recomputations can benefit a person? Phenomenal question. And this is going to depend on the individual's age. It's going to depend on the work that takes place previous to them applying for the benefits or getting the benefits. But basically what this question is pointing out is that you can get a benefit recomputation of your Social Security disability insurance based off of that work. So it's very nice to kind of point this out to an individual that might be receiving benefits, especially if those benefits are limited, especially from the standpoint, once people get later in life, they might see that the amount that they're getting from disability will actually be the same as the amount that they might receive in retirement. And so looking at, or maybe that's the incentive, that's the work there that, if you do work and pay and back into the system, there is that chance that there's a recomputation of benefits so that they might get a higher benefit based off of their work. That can sometimes take place, while they're kind of working in that limited area. But like a great example would be a person that maybe went back to work full time during their trial work period, made a significant amount of money, and then maybe went back onto their benefits, and then they're cruising into, their next couple of years. That's an automatic recomputation process, and it works much like I kind of talked about during my presentation. Social Security eventually gets IRS data, and that varies on when it's filed, so on and so forth, and there's lag years, so on and so forth. But as we're kind of talking about the topic, individuals can work while they're receiving disabilities. The point is, the individual can work while they're receiving disability, and depending on the formula as it applies to them, they could potentially get a recomputation. Or if they stop working and go back to work full time, they can possibly see a scenario where the amount that they were getting at, in Social Security disability will increase, as they potentially either collect disability again or go into retirement. So there's lots of recomputations. A disability amount is kind of fluid in that way, and it does depend on all those factors of recent work. Thank you so much for that question. That's an excellent question. Are ABLE accounts savings counted as an asset for a person in PA? No. ABLE accounts are amazing. I sing from the mountaintops as far as ABLE accounts. They have a very, very ABLE accounts, for many of you that don't know, and this is very quickly, in Pennsylvania, a person can conserve up to $100,000. That's not counted for supplemental security income and is not counted for medical assistance. And then that money in an ABLE account can be used for housing expenses, educational expenses, so many different types of expenses on behalf of that individual. This really was a national program that helped people cope with the lower resource limits of these programs that haven't been changed since the onset of them. And for those of you that are in contact with individuals that get medical assistance or get supplemental security income, this is a great referral. But also, in addition to that, trust funds, provided by Achieva also function in much of the same way, differently than ABLE accounts do. So that might be a route that a person might go much in the same way as an ABLE account.
And Frank, I would like to interject on that too. This is Leanne. With the ABLE, you are capped at 17,000 in one particular year, whereas with a trust, a payback, a pooled, or third party doesn't amount, but a payback or a pooled trust, it's unlimited. So that's something to keep in mind. And then
the next question here on the Q&A also does touch upon ABLE account savings. And I think I feel like that we had addressed that. Really, really good point about that $17 annual contribution. So that's where maybe an inheritance or something like that might not be the right type of scenario or time frame. And then
it's good for work. It's good for like work.
Right.
If someone's working and they're slightly over and you need to put that money somewhere so as not to disturb the benefits. But if you're talking about more of a, like you were saying, Frank, a substantial amount of money that you're coming into, and you can do both, because you can transfer money, from the ABLE into the other if you need to. So it's kind of like a plan that you want to work all of it working together.
Phenomenal points. Thank you so much. So we have an additional question. If a person was in medical and just got approved for SSDI, do they apply for Medicare? No, an individual that's newly eligible for supplemental security income and does not have any other type of insurance will not get Medicare for the first 24 months of that approval, depending on how long it takes a person to get approved. I talked about that appeal period. We go back to month of entitlement. In some cases, that 25 months is much shorter from the time in which they knew that they were actually getting the benefits, depending on when they were approved. And then when it does take place, so let's say a person is getting Social Security disability, it's automatic. A person is contacted about 90 to 120 days previous to their eligibility, much in the same way an individual that's 65 years old and it's already getting their retirement benefits, you're contacted automatically. The enrollment in Medicare takes place automatically. And one more thing, and the state folks will probably echo this also. One more thing about this is that as far as, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. That was terrible. Oh my God, I totally lost my train of thought there. An individual that's eligible for Medicare has to take Medicare. A common anecdote is that people are very, very happy with their Medicaid coverage. Medicaid coverage comes with HMOs. There are probably more people that they're aware of that get Medicaid coverage. They're going to specific doctors, so on and so forth. So commonly individuals that become eligible for Medicare say, nope, you can have it. I don't want the Medicare. I know what's going on here. Anecdotally, there can be some more out-of-pocket costs as it relates to Medicare, even with state buy-in type situations. Now, this might be $5 for a prescription drug. This might be other types of copays. However, once again, these individuals are on limited income. So $5 is significant, so on and so forth. But just, as you're navigating this process, the person's coming up in here, one of the first questions is, I'm good on the Medicare. I want to stick with the Medicaid, the medical assistance. And that's not the case. They're going to have to navigate it. And we all, basically everybody in this room at some point in their lifetime, 97% are all going to have to transition to Medicare, whether it's through aging or whether it's through this 25 months. And we all have to kind of go through that transitional process of understanding new medical assistance benefits that help pay for that, new HMOs that they might potentially get as supplemental plans to Medicare, through Medicaid. But the state, Medicare is the most affordable coverage the state can purchase on behalf of you. So that's why you are referred to that and have to take those benefits. All right. Okay. When a person is denied SSDI benefits for the first time, they have the right to the appeal, etc. in this process. To the people making those decisions, is their job to seek to deny benefits? No, they truly aren't. And therein lies why there had always been a separation between Social Security and the specific state agency that makes medical decision, known as the Disability Determination Service. I think the design for Social Security always was that an individual that there was that impartiality as it relates to Social Security's role in making those decisions. These are state employees that basically work for the Department of Labor and Industry. And as I kind of described before, the frustrating part of maybe that part of the process for individuals is that these state technicians are basically going off of rules and policies that clearly dictate specific types of disabilities for them. So what would seem like going out of their way to deny benefits is more in line with, okay, your disability isn't clearly defined to me, so that I can't make a clear decision. And that's why when I was talking about appeals, the administrative law judge does basically, use mitigating factors a little bit more, maybe looks at the case more from a potential human element. And that's why people might find that the feedback throughout that process is much, they feel like they've been able to provide all the information versus the Disability Determination Service just using the medical information, the work information and other factors to make the decision. And how do they seek to approve their eligibility? maybe an odd question when advocating for a client with disabilities. I think it would be informative for the orientation. So if you are advising an individual, I know I kind of touched upon this before, and I've talked to a lot of people, this is a common, like, as soon as someone knows that, hey, you work for Social Security, I got a question for you. With in those types of situations, what is that most important thing? Should I hire a lawyer? Should I, get an attorney rep? How am I going to get, I've been denied on previous occasions. And what I always answer is medical evidence is the most important key to the process. And not only medical evidence, because something significant might have happened to you 10 years ago. And that disability still might be significant now, but recent medical evidence is what plays the key role in making disability decisions. So if you have somebody in front of you and they're like, man, I'm really frustrated that I just got denied for benefits, so on and so forth. The other encouragement there is, since most of these individuals do have some access to some type of healthcare, is to utilize that healthcare as much as possible. If you're being referred to specialists, go and prefer these specialists. People sometimes get frustrated because, scheduling appointments with doctors can be an extended period, and the other important thing I want to note, and, what I'm encouraging is that individuals basically apply as soon as they can. And in so doing, get the process started. If they receive medical evidence even after the fact, what you'll see is that medical evidence can be used later on in the process. So just because you started the process at one point, you did not seal yourself in that period of time. And what you might want to do is, okay, let me start pursuing more medical evidence with more individuals. So as a result of this, we will, I'll have more if I have to go through additional appeal processes. All right. Do the SSA computers pick up income changes related to Part D subsidy through their data exchanges? If so, do letters go out to those who are not eligible but now eligible? Thank you. Based off of what I understand is there is going to be a run in our systems to potentially identify these individuals, and there is going to be mailers that are sent out throughout this year in order to do so. It's being done kind of on a staggered basis so that everyone's not applying at all. So there are proactive steps that are taking place. However, from that standpoint, you still, that encouragement, that referral, you don't have to get one of these letters to reapply. But yes, to your question, there is an active way that we're attempting to contact members of the population that had previously applied and asking them. And I don't even think they're limited. I don't think they're not computing income. They're basically identifying anybody that had previously applied and encouraging them to apply again. Because Nancy had talked about this. When in doubt, check it out. And we go through these applications all the time. Social Security does it. The state does it. It is a questionnaire that can be, kind of processed on a mass level. But what's important is that the person, I know, at least from my administration, is that the person gets their eligibility. That's our biggest mission is to make sure that everybody that is eligible for a specific program, gets that program. All right. Are employment transport services available to a person that has applied for the autism waiver? I'm going to allow that for the state folks. So does the onus of the person with disabilities to prove their 5-year look back? Once again, I'm going to give that to the state folks. My daughter is 18 with physical disabilities. Do I apply through ODP since she isn't 21 for the, sorry. And thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. And I think I'm down. I'm sorry, this interface is giving me a little. I think that might be it for me. Is it? Man, lots of. All right.
And I think if there's a couple more, Nancy, that were maybe directed towards you, it looks like some people have still stayed on. So if you have a couple minutes, could you answer the questions that were directed towards you?
Yes, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you.
So the first one is, what is the income limit with SSDI to get help with Medicare costs? So you're talking about the Medicare costs. You're talking about the Part B premium, I assume. So or Part D, but let's deal with the premium for Part B, B as in boy. So in my PowerPoint, and which you will get, in a few days, there is an income limit, but it depends on what level of income you're at. So review the pages or the sheets that I have included in my PowerPoint, and you could possibly see approximately where you would fall. But like Frank and I both recommend that you always apply, because they don't count all the income. They do count unearned income, and then about half of the earned income. So always make sure you apply to see what you can get through the state system to pay for the Medicare Part B costs. So the second question, does autism waiver apply under this information? Yes. Yes, the autism waiver is actually ages 21 and above, but the same parameters are there for income and resources. So what happens after the 90 days with Healthy Horizons? This is an SSI is granted or not granted. So I'm assuming you're talking about someone who just is
Transitioning.
just transitioning from high school. They turned 18. They're going to be automatically given Healthy Horizons for 90 days. And if SSI takes longer, or if it's not granted, then you just all you have to do is communicate with the Medicaid office to apply for Healthy Horizons on a permanent basis. So it'll continue, but you have to make that contact with them to say either, number one, SSI was not granted, or number two, SSI has not given us an answer and we need more time. So you can work with the MA Medicaid office in Pennsylvania or in your local community to extend that 90 days based on, SSI either being denied or it's just taking longer than you thought. Okay, are employment transport services available to a person that has applied for the autism waiver but not yet qualified for the waiver? So that's a good question. And I'm not going to say yes or no, because I really believe you don't have a budget yet. So it's not going to actually pay for transportation, but our employment services here is free. So anybody can call us. We're not going to charge you anything. We're supported by a United Way grant. So any employment services that you come to us for counseling is free. Now, transportation is a different matter. If it's to medical appointments, you can get the Medical Assistance Transportation Program. You have to, sign up for that, and your transports would be free to any medical or doctor's appointments. But if it's not to medical, if it's just social or in the community, then there's going to be some costs associated with transportation that nobody else will cover, to my knowledge.
And you can certainly, this is Dale, you could certainly work with, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation if it is employment that's related to work. You can also work with your local transportation provider, paratransit, whoever is serving your transportation needs within your county. So I'm sure there are other services that you can get until you have qualified for the waiver.
Thanks, Dale.
So the onus is on the person with disabilities to prove their 5-year look back.
Yes. Yes, that is correct. That's why we say record keeping is so absolutely important with what you're doing, keeping track, or at least have, in today's day and age with digital banking and everything, a lot of that stuff is at your fingertips, where it was harder before. Banks also keep track of that. If you had to go in and get printed statements, sometimes it takes a little longer, but so that's why we tell people just start holding on to it for that period, just so that you know where it is and you have it when you go, because it will be your responsibility to provide all that documentation that they're requiring.
So the next question is excellent. My daughter is 18 with physical disabilities. Do I apply through ODP since she isn't 21 for the waiver program? So just so you know, there's also it's not commonly used, but it could really help your daughter. She's 18 to 21. There's the OBRA waiver. It's also through the Office of Long-Term Living. So for the ages between 18 and 21, for people with physical disabilities, they can have the OBRA waiver. And then at 21, they would transition to the CHC waiver. If there's an intellectual disability, then ODP would be the right way to go. We always recommend ODP if there's a autism developmental or ID disability, because those could be primary disabilities, and the ODP waiver is more comprehensive than the OBRA waiver, and more comprehensive than the CHC waiver. So that, I hope that helps. Call me, feel free to call me or email me, because I'd love to be able to have a conversation with you about that. Okay, so Scott,
I got Scott's question.
You
Thanks for the reset. We're a team, go team. The question is, I have two disabled adult children receiving SSI, living with me and my wife. The children do not have enough work quarters to qualify for SSD. When I retire, I understand that my Social Security benefit is not reduced, but my wife and children will be subject to the family maximum. My wife has her own quarters of work, but will get the bigger benefit of my SSA by claiming on my account. Is it correct that my wife's benefits will be reduced due to the family maximum? Scott, in your case, potentially yes. So you were informed very well. So you have your children, they're getting SSI. When the first individual applies for retirement benefits, whether it's you and your wife, those individuals, have they not married and not worked over substantial gainful activity, and as long as we're able to prove disability going back beyond age 22, which will probably be okay with you because of that disability process that you did with SSI, they would be eligible to collect off of either you or your wife's records. Now, so your own retirement benefit is not reduced at all. But that family maximum, it can basically pay full benefits to those full unreduced benefits to those other two individuals. But once you add a third individual, the family maximum is divided down to a specific. So there is, kind of a pie slice of three individuals. So two can collect at the same time and there is no reduction. But when it's three collecting at the same time, there might be a pie slice of three collecting from the family maximum. At that point, the office will go back to see if your wife's benefits off of her own working record will be more, or if God forbid someone does pass away or comes off of the record and you go back to two, those two benefits would be increased when that person drops off of the record. Once again, God forbid your wife probably will pass away before the children. So the monthly amounts that they'll get as disabled adult children when the record is no longer paying as a spouse will increase for those two individuals. Not only that, it'll increase because individual disabled adult children or even widows get a higher monthly benefit amount for the worker that's passed away than the worker that's collecting. So there's two potential increases there that could take place. Number one is that that pie slice comes down, but also individual. So that the worker, whether if they're alive, in general, the benefits are not as high. After they pass away, a survivor benefit or a widow's benefit is higher. All right, and then so do waivers cover cost expenses for service dogs? Nancy, you want to?
Yes. I'm so glad
Excellent.
that you asked that, because it can be, waivers can cover the one dog, of course, but a service dog that's certified. It has to be, go through the process of having certification papers. And it does cover the expense for the dog to have, vet services and the needs of a dog. So, that's and we need documentation, medical documentation, that this service dog is required for your various reasons, but mainly for your health and safety.
And I'd like to chirp in on this as well. With regard to service dogs, if in fact you're under a waiver that will not pay for the service dogs, although we at Achieva can't pay for a service dog, through our charitable residual grant, we could pay for training for a dog to become a service dog, or training with the individual through that charitable residual grant. So if you find yourself in a situation where you don't, if you can afford the cost of the dog itself, we can't purchase the animals. We can purchase the services to help train them.
Fantastic. Next question is for me. Is the SGA amount after the reduction of $85 and is it divided by two? Great question, and does address if we want to go down that a little bit farther. Number one, substantial gainful activity doesn't come in play with this type of situation because what we're talking about is supplemental security income eligibility. But you know, I because I was an SSI technician for about 3.5 years, and when I talk to and explain to individuals that are getting SSI, it can be somewhat frustrating that the SSI does reduce when a person does return to work. However, you make a great point. $85, the first $85 is deducted, and then after that, only half is what comes off of the SSI. So I always use $400 per month gross. $400 per month. That's basically a day of the week. You know, you go work at the car auction. You know, so on and so forth. So first $85 is exempted. We're left with $315. We divide that by 2, and we're left with $157. So for an individual that's receiving supplemental security income and they get this earned income, even though it's being reduced, even though their benefit is being reduced, if you go and make $400, it's $157 that's being deducted from the monthly benefit amount. So you are able to earn, you have your $400 in hand. Now, look, I understand it's taxed and so on and so forth, but you know, for the most part, you have gross $400 in hand. Your SSI, let's say it's being reduced from that 913, you know, we're bringing that down to, but at the end of the day, if a person works, they still are getting more total from the earned income and the SSI than they would if they were not working at all. And that's kind of the work incentive of the, you know, substantial and gainful activity. All right. If you already worked for 3 months this year, but your job has terminated due to closing, how does that affect the trial work period? So this year, any of those months in which you worked and earned more than $1,050 per month, that will count as a trial work period. Let's say one of those happened in January, one of those happened in April, and one of those happened in June. It would, you know, those 3 months would be, you know, basically it would depend on if an individual went over 1,050. And then if they had not, they only used one of those months. And don't forget, and I didn't mention this, and it was mentioned on the slide, this is kind of a 60-day rolling period, 60-month rolling period when it comes to a trial work period. So that trial work period will remain in place. That trial work month will remain in place for the next 5 years. And if you know, 5 years from now, you're kind of working again, it'll drop off. So, you know, that period now, maybe 5 years from now would drop off. So that 9 months comes in a 5-year period. So to your question, any month in which you work and earn more than 1,050, what needs to be considered for a student in college, age 18, in regards to Social Security? We haven't applied yet, and there are different guidelines for this age group. Yes, there are. This is common due to what we call deeming. An individual that has a disability. I talked about this before. A person might have a disability, but might not qualify for Social Security. For SSI, that's early in life. There's that deeming situation where the income and resources of the parents can affect a person's eligibility for supplemental security income. However, so that's specific to that. So if now they're age 18 and now it's only their income and resources, which is very, very common, especially individuals with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. If they do apply for SSI at this point, that 18 to 22 timeframe is very, very, you know, and Nancy had prompted me to talk about this during my sign. There's that student income exclusion that could come into play if a person's receiving supplemental security income and is going to even college from age 18 through 22. So important to kind of keep that in mind. And as far as Social Security disability is concerned, depending on that time frame, they might not, they don't have enough of a working record to potentially apply for Social Security disability. However, things are computed much differently when a person's early in their life as far as eligibility for Social Security disability. So in general, for an older individual, Social Security is looking at the last 5 out of the last 10 years to determine monthly amount and potential eligibility. For a person early in life, I think it's 2 out of the last 3. So, you know, if this individual does work and then potentially goes on to Social Security benefits at a later time, they would have that, you know, their benefit is computed differently in their early 20s than they would throughout their lifetime. One thing to mention though, and this goes back to that disabled adult child benefit question, point that Nancy did a phenomenal job of explaining, and I always try to, kind of scream from the mountaintop also. You might say to yourself, look, I know in your lifetime you're not going to work as much as me. It's going to be very important to me as your parent, as your financial planner, to have you be able to collect for my benefits. That might potentially dictate to them whether or not you allow them to work above substantial gainful activity, or, that is kind of that existential kind of question of, how, life you would want them. But I really hate when individuals, come back after the fact and say, man, I really wish I would have known that, especially when it comes to marriage, and especially when it comes to working substantial gainful activity as it relates to disabled adult child benefits, because there is going to be that time period where they can only collect when you're collecting. So, for many children, there's going to be this time between age 18 and when you collect retirement benefits for them to file. Now, God forbid, if something were to happen and you passed away, then that survivor provision will come into play. But there is that time frame, and it's just very important to remain aware that, and it doesn't, it comes back to, it depends, because, it does go to those unsuccessful work attempts. Just because there is 1 month and maybe someone exceeds SGA does not mean they're not eligible for a disabled adult child benefit. But in general, if a person does work an extended period of time at substantial gainful activity, they can jeopardize their potential eligibility as a disabled adult child. So we kind of answered two different ways for SSI and for Social Security disability. And does a parent's income count towards MAUD?
You're going to be allowed to talk. Does a parent's income count towards MAUD?
No, it does not. So MAUD is based on only if there's marriage, a marriage, but not on a parent and not on a sibling.
Right. Nice.
Where can we find info on helping a parent apply for that next question? Where can you find that information? I would suggest contacting one of our benefits counselors. It would be one of the things that you can do.
You can start the process at ssa.gov /SSI. We have what's known as the protected filing tool, but for children age 18 or younger, they're going to have an appointment at some point. So you can contact the Social Security's National 1-800 number. You can go to, and then we'll get some, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to get some more information about this referral wise for applying for SSI. Calling the local field office is also acceptable, because you are going to have an appointment with an individual. Now you can start the medical portion, the medical reporting portion of medical evidence on the internet, but you eventually will have to have an appointment with a Social Security employee initially, and then if they're approved on the back end, as they review financial information. So we're going to get SSI referral information out with our slides. So thank you so much for that. I've done. You referred to a review date by the reviewer. How does the person know when the review date is? They're just contacted. Whenever I do talk to a person that's receiving Social Security benefits, I do encourage them to continue to go to doctors. Once again, medical evidence is huge with this process, not only when a person's applying, but throughout their lifetime. So whether or not they're under that 3, 5 to 7 years, I know people that actually had made that determination. They got to the technician and determined that, and then they waited the 3 years and they called up and they said, "Hey, what's up with my continuing disability review?" There's a certain allocation as to how we kind of initiate those continuing disability reviews, just because it's defined as 3 years. It might take us 4, depending on the amount that are in the pipeline. This also takes place for when individuals are reviewed for disability at age 18, a big distinctive time frame, because we determine disability for individuals under age 18 differently as a child, differently than we do as an adult. A lot of times people call us up, "Hey, I'm 18 now. What's going on with my medical review for age 18? In general, those take place within the first year to year and a half. So, from that standpoint, you'll be contacted. There are extensive appeal rights. There is plenty of, leeway and time given to you to gather all that information, but it will start with a packet. It'll generally be an 8.5 by 11, envelope from the Social Security Administration with those forms, very similar to the ones that you completed during the initial claim process. And as a result, that's how those are initiated.
And Frank, I
Uh,
just also wanted to add that, if a person is working, that they should contact the Ticket to Work program to get information on Ticket to have added protections there from continuing disability reviews. So that's one of the options that you have when you work and you are receiving services to the Ticket to Work program.
Yeah, great question. I mean, great point. Next question is, can an SSI recipient eventually become insured? Happens all the time. Much like I talked about the recomputation, if a person does return to work, we already talked about they might be receiving a reduced SSI benefit, but they're getting more money per month. Then, once that IRS tax data, everything initiates automatically. So all of a sudden they might be, instead of getting $914 a month from SSI, they might have worked enough. Boom. Hey, here's a letter from Social Security now explaining you're getting $500 a month from Social Security. Now you're getting $435 a month from SSI, because the two can, we call that concurrent eligibility. Happens automatically. Once again, once we receive that IRS tax data, and it can continue to keep on happening, those recomputations. So in some situations, you might have a person that transitions entirely from getting SSI to getting Social Security benefits, depending on how much they're working and paying into the system. And the advantages, obviously, of getting Social Security disability versus SSI is your income and resources don't affect that monthly check. So like if a person's getting $914 from Social Security disability, it doesn't matter how much money is in the bank account as far as getting that monthly check. You can work substantially, but it doesn't dollar for dollar reduce from yours. Those key distinctions. But to your point, a person can transition over to Social Security disability by working, and that can happen while receiving SSI.
Frank, I have to, this is Leanne. We have to get off. I have another presentation that I have to do, but there was two quick questions on here.
Sounds good.
That, if you don't mind us jumping in here. The question was about if someone uses an ABLE account, you know what, they must have jumped off the question, so their question disappeared. There was a question on here about if they were working. Yeah, they must have hung up because it's not on here anymore. Oh, no, here it is. If someone is working and earns over the SGA, can they put that money in an ABLE account and not get penalized in overpayment? The answer to that was yes. But again, I think that we need to talk about that with limitation. So they can put a certain amount of money in there and not be penalized. That's where the trust comes into effect that Frank was talking about earlier. If you have some type of payback or pooled trust, that's a better vehicle to get into with regard to that.
Right. So if it's earned income and they're asking, are they over SGA with earned income? That earned income is still counted, Frank, correct? It's only their savings, like going into the second month. I mean, whatever their savings are.
Yeah, the income still counts towards that SSI amount. But
Gotcha.
then it's that
Okay.
ability. Yeah, it's that ability of not counting towards that $2,000 resource limit
the resource
over a period of
limit,
time.
right.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense. Thank you. And then the one other question we just had is, can you get waiver services even if you don't qualify for disability or SSI?
Correct. You can. Absolutely, you can.
Okay, Frank, back to you in case
Thank
we
you.
jump off.
Thank you. Yeah, and to everybody else, I'm here. We're gonna get through these. I promise. Thank you so much, Nancy. Phenomenal information. I learned a lot today. If someone is working and earns over SGA, can they put that money in an ABLE? Oh, we answered that one. All right, done. Okay. Medicaid and Medicare using both benefits, a primer for dual eligible. You're only going to okay. So Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid in general is that program that you get from the state. Many times people get this in forms of like HMO cards, and Medicare is the federal program that also has supplemental policies that sometimes have private insurance agencies that allow for paying the copays and deductibles of that. But Medicaid sometimes is your primary payer, But once you go over to Medicare, Medicare is your primary payer, but the Medicaid then helps you assist you with that. So before, Medicaid is its own freestanding type of medical that's the only source of. Medicare, you'll have Medicare A, you'll have Medicare B. Most people can just have those two, pay the $164. There's copays and deductibles. The state, from a Medicaid standpoint, will cover the premium and provide you a supplemental policy for that. But the transition there is that many times those HMOs are different. You'll find most places that accept insurance for Medicaid will accept insurance for Medicare. From that standpoint, those are those key distinctions that do kind of take place as far as that's concerned. And all right. Okay. Then start it.
So I'm going to jump off, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you for having me here. Again, if there's any questions anybody has about disability rights, feel free to call us.
Thank you so
Thank you so much, Dale.
And thanks, Catherine. I mean, thanks to Nancy and Leanne. I know they're jumping off as well. So thank you all.
Have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Pretty specific question about SSDI and reporting monthly income, but then an overpayment has been accrued. Basically, the question is, what do I recommend as far as getting that time? So this is separate than the terminology of waiver as it relates to what Nancy was talking about from the state. That those waivers are Medicaid type of situation. Social Security has its own waiver process as it relates to overpayments. Now, you might have already applied for that waiver. Waivers do take a little bit longer to process, sometimes in the terms of months instead of weeks. But if you do want some explanation, if you do want your time, with somebody to kind of go through and explain what had taken place, there's a waiver. And then there's also what's known as a reconsideration that can be filed if you think that the overpayment was computed wrong. So there are two options when a person does get a overpayment from Social Security. One is the waiver. A waiver that goes through two criteria: can't afford to pay it back. The overpayment was not your fault. But for the purposes of the Social Security, can take a little longer to get processed. So that you might be in that situation right now where you're not necessarily getting an explanation, but there's a backlog of these. The other alternative is what's known as a reconsideration. Different than the reconsideration I talked about before as it relates to applying for benefits. Reconsideration is a process in which you can say, I doubt that you had computed this. I have different numbers. So you can submit pay stubs, so on and so forth in doing so. So in these cases, these two cases, that's what I would recommend as far as that's concerned. And I think we're at some thank yous here. Thank you. What is the income limit with SSDI to help get to get help with Medicare cost? I would need to get that out to you. Oh my gosh. Includes retirement. It was somewhere in the range of $1,500 per month last year, but everything's changed with the 8.7% cost of living increase. But there's a couple different scenarios there. The Medicaid, but the Medicare costs, the state buy-in, those were in the state slides. I did notice that. So if you review back to that, you will see. But on a simple basis, from what I was understanding, it's somewhere in the range of $1,400 to $1,500 a month, and even then, you would potentially have eligibility in a different form or fashion. I see Catherine just came on. Maybe we're going a little bit too late. Maybe we're not answering all the questions today. So I'm going to let Catherine take it away for a minute here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Frank. And really, I know Nancy McMillan and Dale Verchek had to jump off of the call, but I really want to thank both of them. And Frank, as I shared earlier, we have been in the process of planning this presentation since Frank and I got connected last July. And it's really taken this long to bring all of the players together. And as people can see who are still on the call, these topics are critical to ensure people with disabilities are able to live a fulfilling life. And if you get snarled along the way, people just give up. And it's just very hard to get through the system. And so obviously, this presentation was well received. We will look to do something along these lines again, in case there are other people who didn't get to join us today who would like more information. If your question did not get answered, please email either Patty Arena or myself. And Patty put both of our information into the chat. Please reach out to us and we will connect you directly with Frank, Nancy, or Dale to make sure your question gets answered, because we really wanted to make this more of an intimate event where everybody's questions got answered, but we are really running pretty far over time.
Yeah.
So again, I just really want to thank everybody for their participation. Patty Arena really pulled all of this together with coordinating the webinar. And I am so appreciative to everybody who came together to help us bring this information to the community. Frank, thank you again so much.
No problem. Please take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do. Everybody, thank you for what you do.
Frank, thank you for spending so much time answering all these
It's all
questions.
good.
And Catherine, again, thank you for organizing. We could probably spend 5 or 6 hours on this topic, but for now, I thought this was a great start, and I'm happy to do a program like this again. I just want to reiterate to everyone that I will send out the slides. I'll probably get them out tomorrow or Monday now, because Frank, I think you had a couple things maybe you wanted
Yep,
to
I'm
say.
going to get those, that SSI referral information also on there, which is going to be critical.
Slides. And I think what I'd like everyone to watch for is a survey. We're going to send a survey out, just asking a couple brief questions. And if you could really just provide some good, honest feedback, that's what helps us plan for future programs. That's what helps us get grants to do programs like this. So I promise it'll just be a couple questions. If you all could just take a couple minutes to answer it. But again, this will be recorded and put on our website probably next week. I'll leave the chat box open for a little bit if you need to scroll through to look for my email addresses up there, Catherine's, Nancy's. We'll get everyone the information they need, I promise.
Thank you all again so much. I hope everybody has a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks again, Frank.